tears of a clown. Hello, my fellow Westorians. I'm Aziz. With me is Ashea, and this is Valar Rereadis. Each episode of Valar Rereadis for the Winds of Winter will feature a guest or guests. We'll take a closer look at each chapter, going through them one by one instead of in batches. Hey, that's not true today. We're doing two, but they're not full chapters, so it's still pretty much true. The spirit of the concept is maintained. A standard warning must apply as well. These chapters are subject to change by the time we see them. Although, honestly, I don't know if that warning really needs to apply for this one because we haven't actually seen them. We just have some information on them. We don't actually have chapters so much as we have information about chapters. And we have questions. We have a bit of a backlog from past episodes. You know, we once we move on to the next chapter, we're not talking about Mercy when we're talking about Arianne. So we don't answer questions about Mercy when during an Arianne episode, for example. But we do have a few questions from past episodes that we've pulled together, as well as a few other fun topics. We're going to cover the Riverlands prologue. We're going to cover Riverlands / Westerlands, given we don't know exactly. We have to leave that kind of wide open. The Asha fragment. We're going to talk about a few themes and miscellaneous topics, and we're going to go deeper into the concept of the Stark convergence, the Stark heir situation. It's like the game of Winterfell's throne in a sense, and we've talked about it a bit. We talked about it at the end of Dance with Dragons in our coverage there, but there's a lot more we could say on it, and more has been revealed on it given the fact that Mercy and Elaine and the Theon chapter, as well as Bran just, kind of popping up in places. And to help us discuss these excellent, fun chapters and tidbits, we have our recurring contributor on camera with us live today. Nina, how's it going?
It is going great. It's finally back after I think I haven't actually been on myself, just myself, for 2 years. So this is very exciting.
It has been a while, right? We usually have you on. Our pattern has been to have you on for the wrap-ups, but of course there's less to wrap up this time. And we had Joe Buckley and Lady Gwyn, our other usual companion. We had them on for individual chapters, so it just kind of made sense to run it out like this. And here we are. And make sure everyone,
Here we are indeed.
Yeah, and make sure everyone to check out Good Queen Alley with 1L.tumblr.com. That is Nina's blog, and there are so many great takes over there. You've got just a wide variety of topics. It's not like we can say, oh, she focuses on this or that or that. You got so much you talk about over there, and a lot of succession stuff. You're really good at handling stuff like that. You got a lot of good theories. You're really good at thinking through the plot lines, which is really helpful today when we don't have as much solid information to work with. So looking forward to
you're gonna make me blush.
Well, let's see if we can do some more of that. We'll get into the information. As usual, everybody, you can send us questions. You can send them ahead of time on one of our many social media outlets like Flick or Facebook or Slack or Discord or Twitter or Patreon. You can also send us questions live here on YouTube. Ashea will grab them, and we'll handle them at the end unless they are particularly pertinent to the current topic, in which case we may jump ahead and take on the question right in the moment. Now, usually we start with a meta history, meaning the history of this particular chapter, but we don't have a chapter, so we're doing a meta calculation. A lot of people are concerned with how much of the Winds of Winter has come out. And, so much of the book's already spoiled and all this. And I wanted to kind of get to a more granular level because I don't really think that's true, but I don't, that's a matter of opinion. So I thought we'd try to back my opinion up. And, I'm not the only one who has this opinion with some data, right? We can do, we got pretty deep into at the end of every Valar Rereadis episode with the timestamps and counting them, doing the math and the percentages. And, well, let's build on that. So, Nina, you had a kind of a similar take. My first guess was roughly 12%. Before I did the math, I said 12% was my guess. And part of that was based on the fact that a lot of these chapters are kind of on the shorter end, and none of them are long. Mm-hmm. We don't have a single, long spoiler chapter. There's chapters like in Clash of Kings, there's a chapter that's 71 minutes long. And there's a chapter in Feast for Crows. It's 60 minutes long, and there's several. And there isn't even one here. The longest one here is about 40, and that was only one of them is that long. So Is that how you feel about it roughly too?
It is. And I know this is something that I think even George R. R. Martin has spoken about this. I think it was with respect to Sons of the Dragon, where he had read it and then it was released and people said, well, you already read it, so it's not that special. But I think with here, we're actually getting that much of the Winds of Winter. I would say, I mean, you're obviously more of a numbers person than I am when it comes to this. But I think, yeah, it's probably about right. We probably have maybe 10 to 12% of the book at this point. And what we have is stuff we were already supposed to know going into the Winds of Winter. It's not that this was delayed intentionally to the Winds of Winter. He would have fit this all in if the book had physically been able to bind it. Yeah. So this is really more of a bridge between A Dance with Dragon and the Winds of Winter, of the things you were already supposed to know going in, as opposed to kind of spoiling the book.
Yeah, that's a great point, because it's true that almost all of these chapters were planned for A Dance with Dragons. He wrote them with the themes of that book in mind. They were meant to be part of the climax. Like, The Forsaken is a setup for what's coming in the next book. But instead it's setting up what's coming in that book. So you're right, it's set up. It's like appetizers. Here's one thing I did. Okay, so I took the word count of Mercy and I took the word count of a few other chapters and compared them to the word count of other chapters in published chapters. Like, for example, the Mercy chapter is about 40 words different than Bran 3. So that's really close, right? 40 words. That's like 30 seconds. So if that, right? So that's a 41-minute chapter, and our Mercy audio production is about 38 and a half minutes. So somewhere in there is the average, right? Roy Dotrice maybe reads a little slower than our audio production, whatever. Some words are longer than others, that kind of thing. So we'll call it roughly 40 minutes for 6,000 words. Well, we have 280 minutes. Based on that math, we have 280 minutes of the Winds of Winter, based on word counts for all those chapters. 280 minutes. You know how, if you all remember how long A Dance with Dragons was, it was 2,900 minutes. So that's not even 10% of that book if it's the same length, which it won't be the exact same length, but it's going to be big. It's going to be a huge book. It might be the longest yet. If not, it'll be close, most likely. So, and if we're looking at what happened in A Game of Thrones, let's say what happened in the first 280 minutes of book 1. The Starks hadn't even left Winterfell yet, y'all. That's like, Bran has been thrown. Like, he did catch Cersei and Jaime in the act. That's happened. Dany's just been married. That's it. Like, she just had her wedding. Jon has departed for the Wall. I mean, those are important chapters for sure. Like, the others showed up and all that, but like, it's definitely not the meat of the story. Like, Arya's still like, uh-oh, they're gonna be mad at me for not sewing properly. Like, consider where she's at now. So,
well, and that's I went back to because sometimes I do research for these.
Sometimes.
Dance with Dragons, and I went to the end of the second Valar Rereadis episode for Dance with Dragons. I think was 292 minutes even through the book, something like that, nice. Or maybe it was 290. I don't remember, something like that. So it was roughly about 280 minutes, give or take, and that ends with the Merchant's Man, which is not that far into the book. Very little had happened. I think there had been one Jon chapter, I think 1 or 2 Daenerys chapters, where Tyrion hadn't yet met Aegon. This is still very early into the book. So I'm not worried about, any kind of, we've already known all the big things that are going to happen. I don't think we're even close to knowing.
Yeah, it's just that we've figured out a lot, but there's just paired up with how much there is. Like, maybe we've scratched 5%. 5%'s a lot because it's a massive book. But in terms of how much there is, it's not that much. So it's just a good thing. Keep in perspective, everybody. If you feel like, a lot has already come out, I would, I think this makes the case that not really. And if we were to look at another way to look at it is to look at locations. We've seen the Crofters Village, the Bravos, Gates of the Moon, Storm's End, and some area, the Red Wine Straits, roughly, wherever exactly that is, if that's House Pharaoh or the Isle of Pigs, whatever, something that was. The location itself isn't super important because they're leaving. But we haven't seen the Dothraki Sea. We haven't seen Marine. Well, we haven't seen Marine really, but I meant to say we haven't seen Old Town. We haven't seen High Hermitage, or
we haven't seen inside Meereen. We've been kind of outside Meereen.
Good point. Right. Yeah. Like, because Barristan charges like right there, and yeah, we only see like right at the gates. And then we haven't seen Pennytree, where Brienne and Jaime are. We haven't seen Skagos, or the way to Skagos. The Wall, we haven't been back there. But we also have something kind of interesting, which is different, which is that Bran is sort of breaking the rules now. We've talked about how Bran is sort of in these other POVs, even though he's not there. And that's a new kind of concept for us to consider, isn't it?
It is. It's, it kind of opens up the possibilities now, because now when you have the magical ability to see anywhere, well, you have the magical ability to see anywhere. So you're not limited to, I can only go to places where there are the 20 remaining POV characters who are physically present. I can see anywhere at any point. So now George R. Martin has basically the whole map to play with and say, if I want to set something here, I can, and the excuse can be, well, Bran can see it because he's magic.
Right, yeah, and it doesn't seem strange because it's been set up really well. I mean, he can be in whether he's looking through the eyes of a raven or, I don't know, the mechanism, just looking somehow. It's not super important to get down to that level of detail. The fact is he can do it, or is going to be able to do it, is gaining the ability to do it, however you want to phrase it. And that's interesting because we have the characters are shrinking down to a smaller group of locations. Not a small group of locations, but more POVs are coming together than we've seen before, besides at the beginning. And we don't have a POV currently at places like Winterfell, Sunspear, Harrenhal, Dragonstone, some of the most traveled locations, places we've had a lot of chapters. So what that says to us is we don't actually have to have a POV at these places if we want to potentially, if George wants to show us something. You're right, he can just go. For example, the Tower Joy flashback on the TV show. I don't know if we're going to get that, but it's a distinct possibility, and it's a perfect example, even though it's also kind of, forget the fact that it's going back in time a little, but it still tells us that same basic concept. Mm-hmm. Like right now, Harrenhal, I'm dying to know what's going to go on in Harrenhal, but it's hard to imagine right now there's no POV really that's anywhere near there. Well, I guess near technically, right. But
and I don't see any reason why anyone would be going there at this point.
Yeah, surely it'll become important again, but at the moment it's kind of in a lull. It's got the Holy 100 are holding the fort down.
Holy 86.
Yes, the Holy 86. Yeah, we got to keep our... Hey, you just said you weren't a numbers person, and there you go. Nice. You are a memory person. Yeah.
I am, in fact, a memory person.
So we've also got a short list of other potential locations we could see, some of which we've barely seen, some of which we've never seen. Night Fort we have seen, not a lot of, but pretty good chance we'll see it. You're pretty sure we'll see Night Fort, right?
I think we'll go back to the Night Fort. There's too much kind of to play with there. There's a lot of reasons why we could see it, and also the Night Fort is kind of the one way that we know that you can get through the wall if Bran needs to get back
right.
through. So it may just be in terms of pure practicalities.
Yes, true that. That's a very good point. Next up, we have Eastwatch, we have not seen. It's been talked about a lot. It seems to be in peril. It's maybe been in visions, probably maybe not, depending on Melisandre. We're not sure about that one. That's a probably not. But still, it's still probably in trouble, whether that vision was about it or not.
I think if you're near the wall, you're probably in trouble.
Yeah, right. Like, it's actually might be better to be in the Shadow Tower. We'll probably never see the Shadow Tower. If bad things happen to the Shadow Tower, it'll be off page. But Eastwatch, we might see, although there's no POV there, so that might be another thing that we get off screen. But maybe Davos goes there, right? Is that something you've considered?
Well, I also think that I wouldn't be surprised if Arya goes through Eastwatch and coming back from Braavos. So
that's a good point. Yeah. Yeah, it's either that or White Harbor, but Stannis specifically said he wanted Massey to send men to Eastwatch, or send archers to Eastwatch, etc. He specifically said that. So White Harbor's possible, but yeah, Eastwatch seems more likely. It's also, I think it's closer by ship. Maybe not a lot closer, but anyway. Speaking of White Harbor, that's another possibility. Davos was tasked with going back through White Harbor. He's supposed to bring Rickon there. He's not supposed to bring Rickon to Eastwatch, as far as we know. Do you think we'll maybe see White Harbor? Do you think Davos will go there, or maybe he'll be diverted?
I could see Davos going through there. I also think Littlefinger is taking Sansa north. The best way to go at this point is by ship. They're not going to go through the Riverlands and up the neck that's war-torn at this point.
Good point.
It makes a lot more sense to go faster via ship up through White Harbor. And then, if Rickon and also maybe Arya have already passed through...
Ooh. On the trail of her family.
Interesting.
Or that would be kind of a twist if one or two of them met there instead of at Winterfell. It seems like they're more likely to converge at Winterfell, but like actually like Arya and Sansa show up at White Harbor at the same time. That would be pretty wild. Be like, oh, whoa, hey. Or Rickon or whatever. It's like, hey, I know you. Hey, that's my brother. What the? Fancy meeting you here. Haven't
seen you in a while.
Yeah. It's like, hey, where you been, bro? Rickon's like, why's your hair brown? That's the first thing he'd say, just something like little kid, like, no, just cut to the chase, like. Or actually she'd say something like, where's your wolf? And you'd be like, oh. Don't say that. Vace Dothrak. Now let's go all the way to the other side of the world. That seems like very, very likely that Dany's going to go.
100%.
Yeah, like it's pretty hard.
Not even a question in my mind. Yeah. We're absolutely going back there. Daenerys has already envisioned it. Mm-hmm. There's no other possibility. They've already very clearly set up this is where all of the Dothraki gather to be one. She's going to unite them. Yeah. It has to happen at Vaes Dothrak.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. It seems pretty straightforward. The how is another matter. I'm going to enjoy reading it. The way George writes, it's going to be awesome. Just the way he wields words is, even if we have some idea of what's coming, it's going to be amazing to see the way he portrays it. But yeah, I think that is basically a foregone conclusion. Totally agree with you there. Volantis as well, I think is maybe slightly less of a foregone conclusion, but pretty darn certain. Maybe we'll call that 99.9%, but still... Pretty.
No, I wrote a whole post about Volantis being doomed, and very specific, the word doomed. There's Volantis, no question in my mind that Volantis is 100% doomed, that there is going to be a slave uprising led and inspired by Daenerys happening in the Winds of Winter. Absolutely happening.
It'll fit in so nicely with the rest of the cities along the Rhoyne. It's gonna match. It may not be like destroyed, the city, like physically leveled, but yeah, the people in charge, they're done. They're done. But there might be lots of destruction too. Like, I don't know if like we'll see the Black Walls, like something like that. It'd be kind of an interesting parallel if like the Black Walls come down right around the time the wall comes down, or something wild like that.
Hard to say, but I definitely think if there's not a complete leveling of the city, it's definitely going to be old Volantis as it was is no more.
Yeah. New Volantis. It's no more old Volantis. Yeah, it's now the new Volantis. And let's not forget the random comment George said to me as I was having my world map signed at Worldcon, when I put Michael Clarfeld's beautiful, huge map in front of him, and he said, the whole world. And as I start to walk away, he's like, soon all this will be burning. and I was like, whoa, spoiler. So that does somewhat argue for all these free cities taking, at least some of them being torched. Watch out, free cities. George is
turns out when you base your whole life on slavery, it ends poorly for you.
Yeah, that's true.
Who could have guessed?
Now, one that, moving up along the coast here, one that I'm less sure about is Pentos. I think there's a good chance we'll see that. I wouldn't be able to call that a slam dunk like Vaes Dothrak or Volantis, and probably not even White Harbor, but it's pretty likely. There's a lot of things pointing there. We got the Tattered Prince saying, I want it. We got Barristan saying, okay. And then we got Illyrio and Daenerys maybe kind of upending what's going on behind the scenes and the conspiracy and all that. So do you feel pretty strongly about that one too?
I think 100% that she's going to go through Pentos, because at this moment Daenerys has no reason to believe that Illyrio isn't still her friend. She thinks he still is. If Daenerys unites with Tyrion, and Tyrion thinks the only way that I'm going to keep my head on my neck is to sell out Aegon to Daenerys, then the first thing he's going to say is, Hey, by the way, Daenerys, did you know that your old friend Illyrio was planning on you dying so that Aegon could be king?
Yeah, she'd be like,
I think Daenerys is going to go to him and say, hey, hi, friend, remember me? Remember when you thought that I was going to die and then you were going to plan to marry me so that your guy could be king?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not going to fly with me.
Yeah, she has questions. She will have questions. Yes. Yes. That is going to be very interesting. It'll be a reckoning of sorts there, and because Tyrion won't have to put his thumb on the scale. You're right. He could just tell the straight truth that he learned, and that alone is just like, what now? He did what now? He was what now? What was the plan exactly? He was my brother. What? And yeah. So that's going to be super interesting. Daniel have to like rethink back with then, and like because she didn't trust Illyrio even back then at first, and Viserys sort of convinced her to like, no, he's blah blah blah. But she was like, okay, you would know better, and like, no, he wouldn't. But she learned, but she hasn't necessarily rethought some of those early lessons, and that might be coming.
The other thing that I think argues for Pentos is that Pentos is almost directly across from King's Landing in terms of latitude. So if you're going to have a jumping off point.
Yeah, she could go straight there or to Dragonstone, which is also, on the way. So that fits really well. You're right. Like as far as a travelogue, a journey, a path to map out, she comes back from Vaes Dothrak to Meereen, goes around Valyria, hits Volantis, goes up the coast to maybe, I don't know, did she bother with Tyrosh? I wonder if like Tyrosh would be kind of in the way there. Like you could see her skipping over Lys because it's an island and it doesn't maybe have, I don't know, it doesn't seem like there's much reason to go there. Tyrosh, what do you think about Tyrosh?
Yeah, she'd probably you kind of have to go out of your way to go to Tyrosh, and there's not really much there for her, so.
Yeah. I guess we don't seem to have a lot of reason. There doesn't seem to be a lot of reason for her to go there, at least nothing we can think of. And it seems like, and given that so much is set up, it doesn't seem like super likely George will just insert a stop there, write a whole nother city, just something he can skip over when he's got so much else to write, Because as far as Pentos goes, I mean, we haven't really seen it, right? We've been inside Illyrio's manse. That's it. Like, Dany's been inside his manse, and Tyrion's been inside his manse, and we haven't seen outside the walls.
Are we really sure that it exists?
It's a liminal space.
Yeah.
Illyrio's manse. Just Liminal's manse. Yeah, there's another joke in there somewhere. So yeah, Pentos seems like, I think I have to agree. Tyrosh, not super likely. The Stepstones are also kind of on the way. I don't know if that matters. If we think about Aurane waters, I don't know if that proximity matters in terms of the ships running into each other, because he's not going to like attack them. Like that doesn't. He'll be massively outnumbered. But what is your? I guess while we're at it, do you have a general prediction for Aurane waters?
Hard to say with Aurane waters because ultimately Aurane is only working for Aurane. So the only thing he wants is to keep going up as far as he can. I wouldn't be surprised if, I wouldn't be surprised by anything Aurane does. I wouldn't be surprised if the end of his story is just he's Pirate King of the Stepstones. I wouldn't be surprised if he comes to Aegon and says, make me Lord of Driftmark. I wouldn't be surprised if he tries to come to Daenerys and say, make me Lord of Driftmark. Like, literally nothing at this point would surprise me. The only thing that would surprise me is Aurane saying, I've had enough.
Yeah. That's cool, because that's good job, George. We those of us who spend an awful lot of time thinking about this, if he's given us clues that tell us what's going to happen, we didn't catch him. So it's a pretty he's a fun little small side character that we have a big question mark for. And yep, just another little mystery. One interesting question that I have, this is a much smaller location and I'm not sure what to do with it, is the Quiet Isle. Now, what we saw from the TV show is, Sandor gets activated, like they bring me back in, and something like that's got to happen. And it's kind of hard for me to picture that happening off page. Like he just shows up one day. It's like, yeah, the village I was at got slaughtered and here I am. Like, I feel like we have to see that, which is like, well, who's going to see that? The only way we see that is if it's like an epilogue or a prologue.
Yeah.
So, I mean, just thinking that through, that's kind of the conclusion I arrived at. I'm not sure George would use an epilogue or a prologue on that.
Right.
He might, though. What do you think about this idea? You and I hadn't talked about this before. Usually, a lot of these things we've talked about in advance, but this isn't one that I don't think we've talked about. So I'm curious what your live reaction to this idea would be.
Raw and unfiltered.
Yeah.
No, it is a question. There's a couple locations that George R. Martin is clearly interested in, but I'm not really sure what he does with them,
Yeah.
and the Quiet Isles is certainly among that. That Sandor is coming back in the story, I think, is unquestionable. But the how is a little bit confusing. I don't think they would be an epilogue of the Winds of Winter, only because he seems to like to do those at act breaks. And there doesn't really seem to be a reason for an act break between the Winds of Winter and the Dream of Spring. This seems like just kind of the climax together. Maybe he would do it as a prologue of A Dream of Spring, but I don't know. Would he spend a whole prologue just to kind of reintroduce Sandor Clegane, who by no means is an uninteresting character, but he is just one character.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Sort of
it just
thing.
seems like there has to be something
and he's
else.
Not
yeah.
He's not an endgame figure. I don't mean that in the sense that he can't be part of the endgame. I mean, he's not the others.
Yeah.
He's not like the Night's Watch or something where this is crucial to the end of the story. He's one very interesting, very complex, but just one character. So maybe he would have someone stop over, or he may just say, we've seen all we're going to see of the Quiet Isle, and Sandor comes back in the story and says, hey, I was gone for a little bit, and now I'm back, and I'm ready to go.
Who let the dog out?
Oh my god.
But no, yeah, and what...
That really is an unfiltered reaction.
Well, I guess my question is, who do you think is, ravaging the Quiet Isle then?
Well, one of the reasons I segued from Aurane Waters is that he's a outside possibility, but I think more likely it would be Euron. We see a little bit of, in the show, Euron kind of doing stuff on all the coasts, kind of off page a little bit, and that's not necessarily what's going to happen in the books, but it's being set up as George has talked about how there's two big fleets, sometimes three in Westeros: the Royal Fleet, the Red Wine Fleet, and the Greyjoy Fleet. And the Royal Fleet we just talked about was stolen, what level left of it was there, and the Red Wine Fleet's about to be destroyed by blood and krakens, and I don't know exactly what, but it doesn't look good for them.
So then my thought is, if you think possibly it's Euron's fleet, we have two POVs that could be with Euron. One I really hope not, which is Sam Tarly. The other one is Aeron if he survives. So the idea that if Euron's men attacked the Quiet Isle, I feel like it would be significant for Aeron to see a bunch of, religious people get sacked. I don't really think he's going to live that long, though, personally.
I don't either, but it does fit because, and we brought this up at the time when Brienne went to the Quiet Isle, how there was given what was going on in A Feast for Crows and talking about Euron and how he's on the rise, it's like, well, the parallel between the Quiet Isle and Euron's silence is kind of there may not be anything to that, but it's worth considering. And given what you're saying, Nina, yeah, if the whole POV, the whole prologue, if it's just about Sandor's return, it doesn't seem like enough for an epilogue, or for a prologue or an epilogue. It's too small, even though he is an important character. But if there's something else happening, like, say, using the Varamir prologue as an example, Varamir by himself, not important. But the concepts he introduces in that chapter, the second life and seeing the others and feeling what it's like to be burned by Melisandre's flames, even little things like that, those are pretty important details. So that could be what rounds this out, fills it out into something more substantial. Yeah.
Of course, my hope is that the prologue of A Dream of Spring is our friend Stone Snake somewhere behind.
Yeah, what the heck happened to that guy? Come on, Stone
Still
Snake.
alive, not clear where he is.
Yeah, he's hanging out with Sir Alistair. The party of Lost Beyond the Wall.
And Benjen.
Don't forget Benjen. Yeah, he's the founding member. It's like, oh, there you are. It's like, yeah, I found this really. They're hiding in Ygritte's cave. They're like, dude, this boy. He's right. They should not have left this cave. This is a really nice spot.
Oh goodness.
So Casterly Rock. That's one that George says we'll eventually see, and I figure Winds of Winter is a pretty good. Dream of Spring will definitely have seen it by then, if not in it. So, but the question is whether we'll see it before that. I would guess yes. What do you think?
I'm less convinced Casterly Rock. I more see Casterly Rock as happening in A Dream of Spring.
Okay, yeah.
And that's more because I don't really see Cersei leaving King's Landing. and I know that's something different people have different takes on. For me, I don't really see her leaving King's Landing at this point.
Okay.
So I don't think, I think the person that Casterly Rock matters to the most at this point is Tyrion. And I think we need to see it through Tyrion. And I don't think Tyrion gets back home until the very end of the Winds of Winter, and then we would see him in A Dream of Spring.
That makes sense, yeah.
Kind of think that that's where that's gonna go. But who's to say?
I can see that. Yeah, that's a very valid theory. Like, certainly wouldn't argue with that, obviously. And I don't have a lot of confidence in seeing it in Winds of Winter. It's one of those, like, I think it's like 60-40 kind of thing. So, yeah, so we'll have to see. That's cool. We'll wonder about that. I'm dying to see what it looks like just because it's so cool. I mean, it's one of the neatest designs, ideas.
It's a mountain.
Yeah, right? It's just all these, I mean, we've seen cool tunnels before, but usually the tunnels are like under the ground. This is like into a mountain that's above, like well above ground. You got
whole
tunnels
castle
up in the air.
is a mountain.
Yeah, it's just really cool. It's probably not going to be a huge part of the story how cool it is, but I'm just being a world building nerd. I'm very interested. And the Twins is kind of a cool world building situation as well. Twin castles guard on both sides of a bridge. That's a sensible type of setup. And we may be seeing this place again. Do you think we'll go back to the Twins? One maybe sort of obvious thing to point to is, Arya's thing on the show, which I don't think we're going to have that happen. No. But the phrase will have a comeuppance. So that's why it might be, it may not happen at the Twins. It may not be Arya doing something like that, but the gist of it, they'll get their karma and it may happen at their own place. What do you think about that?
Oh, I would not be surprised whatsoever if we saw the Twins again, because at this point, I don't have really strong feelings on second Red Wedding or Red Wedding 2.0 theories, but that Davin Lannister is getting married to a Frey and that something is probably going to happen then, I think is not unreasonable to conclude. And although it's often considered that that's going to happen at Riverrun, there's nothing actually saying that's going to happen at Riverrun. Yeah. It's entirely possible that happens at the Twins. So I would not be surprised if a Red Wedding 2.0 scenario happens, which again, I have no strong feelings about, but if it happens, would not at all be surprised if that happens at the Twins, would not be surprised if that's where we see a major Frey comeuppance.
Right on, yeah. I have to agree with that. Yeah, because it's definitely kind of up in the air. Twins, Riverrun, yeah. We'll have to see. That's a very interesting location. We'll be coming back to it to talk about the prologue stuff in a minute, but we've got a few more locations to run through. Here's several locations. Well, I guess we can mention Riverrun a little bit separately. Do you have any specific predictions for Riverrun? Obviously, the Tomo Sevens being inside and all that is like that's not a good. They're not in. We're obviously rooting for the BWB over. Well, I mean, I would like Jenna Lannister to get out of that, okay, but I don't know if there's a way for us to have our cake and eat it too. With her husband being,
I would say that Emmon Frey probably has bigger problems than whose name is on a piece of paper.
Yeah, that's very true. He's gonna have a lot more to complain about. Some real things to complain about,
and then nothing to complain about.
Yeah, and then he will be silenced. Yes, forever. So here are some locations that have lots of H's in them. We have Hornhill, we have Hardhome, and we have Highagarden. Yeah, that's how you pronounce it, Highagarden. So do you think we'll see Highgarden? It's certainly another one that George says we will see. That one I feel more strongly about being more likely in A Dream of Spring thing. But it could be in the Winds of Winter. What do you think?
I think we will go to Highgarden, and I wouldn't be surprised because I think if Euron is taking over Old Town for whatever horrible magic he wants, Sam is going to want to get out of there. And I think his plan, the only reasonable plan he really has, is where's the safest place I can go is probably Highgarden. That's the next place to go, and kind of this is the center of anti-Euron resistance in the Reach and maybe all of the south of Westeros. So no, I think there is, and also I forget when, but George R. R. Martin did confirm that at some point we're going to see Willis and Garland again. Yeah. And they're I think both at Highgarden. So I think there is a strong possibility that in the Winds of Winter we go to Highgarden.
That's cool. Yeah, that would be neat. And I think that their hedge maze would work really well on the Ironborn. I mean, especially on Euron. Like if you're on a strong psychedelic, a hedge maze will definitely throw you off. That will be like, whoa. They'll be like, whoa, I was just here, or was I? Oh. So they're well prepared. Now Horn
Victorian, just forget about us.
Okay, so Horn Hill, more H's. That's we could see Gilly go there, maybe Sam himself, maybe both of them. Obviously Gilly's not a POV, but she could go there without us seeing it directly. Certainly we saw it on TV briefly, and so that of course gives us it gives us at least a little bit more, maybe a boost of its odds of being seen in the books. What are your thoughts on Horn Hill's odds of being seen?
My think very good, and kind of tied into the same reason that I think we're going to see Highgarden is, Sam already, his plan is to send Gilly to Horn Hill. I don't know if he's going to send her there immediately or if he's not going to have time before Euron takes over, but I think that Sam is going to, when he leaves Old Town and try and get away from Euron, I think he's going to try and stop at Horn Hill, either to get Gilly and or to warn his mom and sisters, because that seems like something that Sam would do. Sam definitely cares about his mom and sisters, and I think he'd want them to say, hey, there's a crazy man who thinks he's a god king and he's working horrible magic south. You may want to leave.
Geographically, this makes more sense than what the show gave us too, because the show had him go to Horn Hill first and then to the Citadel, right? Isn't that what happened? Yeah, because they ran off with the sword. Yeah, of course. And which that was weird too.
That plotline.
So this makes more. Yeah, this order of effects makes more sense. Like, yeah, the warning, and then he goes to tell them, "Hey, watch out, watch out."
Yeah, I really like Dornish Dame here says, from what we've learned of him, I feel like Willis is someone who would take Sam seriously in spite of Randall's attitude toward him, which is a nice idea, which is just that Sam escaping would get up to Highgarden to warn them, and that's where we would see Highgarden.
Oh, yeah, because you got to have a POV. If you're going to see Highgarden, you got to have a POV, and yeah, like Sam would be a sensible option.
And there's a reason for him to try to go up there.
Yeah, that's a good point. Very good take. So that makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of reason for, Euron to move inland a bit. I mean, he's certainly going to control the seas, but that can't be it. If he wants to take the Iron Throne, he's got to dominate other spots as well. He's got to shatter the existing power centers. That's one thing he's all about, is breaking the structures and breaking the traditions and just blowing up all the things that exist already, so he can rebuild the world, with his whole charnel pit vision and all that. So yeah, that fits pretty well with I'd say it's a pretty much a bullseye. Speaking of charnel pits, and which of course is a mass grave, Hardhome, let's talk about that one. That is a perfect example of one that we might not get to see. It's hard to imagine who the POV would be for that, but not impossible. It's one that the show might have just been like, oh, we got to show this. It's too cool to not show, but, we're not going to see it in the books. Where do you fall on the spectrum of possibilities for Hardhome? We could also feel free to talk about what you think might happen there, too, just besides the location itself.
Well, Hardhome kind of falls, when you were talking about the Quiet Isle, that's kind of the same way I feel about Hardhome, which is that George R. Martin clearly likes this location. He clearly wants to do something with this location. But practically speaking, is there a reason to do something with this location? Is there a reason he can justify? I mean, as an author, he can do anything he wants. He could write a character to be anywhere and justify it. But is there a practical reason in the story that we would have a character go to Hardhome and do something? Because the entire point, or at least my opinion, the entire point of the second Hardhome mission that John plans is that this is a terrible idea that would never work. Hardhome is nowhere near the wall. It is absolutely crawling with whites and others. The people don't want to come with you. There's no way to march there in winter. You can't sail there in winter. This is not a good place to get to. There is no practical way to get to this place. So why would you go there is sort of the question. But George R. Martin clearly likes this location. He likes the idea that there was this cataclysmic event 600 years ago that turned it into whatever the heck it is today. He likes the idea that there's these crazy screaming caves and strange elements to it. he clearly likes this location. So again, he can do anything he wants. He could justify whatever he wants. Do I necessarily think we would go to Hardhome? No, but would I be surprised if he came up with a reason to send a character to Hardhome? Also, no.
Yeah, same.
We've gotten a couple comments throughout the episode with one way that we could see both Quiet Isle and Hardhome. Here from Guilty Undertaker, they say, I think Hardhome's fall will be witnessed remotely by Bran and or Jon. It's very possible. And Dornish Dame also said Quiet Isle could maybe be one for Bran Raven if that becomes a scene. That obviously we've talked about how that opens us up so much more.
Very
to
good
seeing.
Job, y'all, connecting those dots. You're right. Like we just broached the subject of a new potential that George has given us for how POVs can be shown, or like Bran's POV breaks the existing rules. You're right. Maybe we should look outside the box a little bit, and that's a great point. Yeah, I mean, like Nina just said, George can write it any way he wants. No, there's no saying he can't do that. No saying he won't do that. And it seems like it would allow him to overcome some of the difficulties that we're faced with from a narrative perspective, like how to present these locations. Yeah, magic could cut it. Great call. Speaking of a semi-magical location, maybe not magical, but mystical, certainly surrounded by thoughts of such, is another compelling location that has been in the realm of the book since the beginning. Like early chapters, we've been hearing about Starfall. And we know we're going to go there one day, right? We're definitely going to see it, but will it be during Winds of Winter? Will it be Dream of Spring? Will it be both? Probably not both. But what do you think about Starfall? I have a goofy theory that I'll finish us off with, because I don't think it's not very serious. It's an idea I had like 20 years ago. But so let's have a more reasonable set of ideas first.
Oh my goodness. Well, no, I've been saying probably like 100 times, probably every time that I'm on the show, I say this, and I'll keep saying it every time I'm on the show until the Winds of Winter comes out, is that I don't feel confident about basically anything about the Arianne storyline in the Winds of Winter, except for the fact that I think it will feature Starfall. And the reason I think that is because I think George R. R. Martin sort of wrote himself into a corner where he wanted the Daynes to be a really big deal and wanted to reveal a lot of information about the Daynes. And then the 5-year gap didn't happen, and little Edric Dayne stayed a 12-year-old, and he couldn't have him be sort of the morning. So look at this. How about I just insert another Dayne into the story in a different context?
Another double H name. High Hermitage. Woohoo!
Exactly. No, I think that the entire reason that this storyline, I shouldn't say the entire reason, obviously there's other parts to it, but I think the practical storytelling reason that the Arianne storyline will exist in the Winds of Winter is for George R. R. Martin to reveal information about the Daynes and the Tower of Joy that he was going to reveal in a different way at some point, and this is kind of the only way he can. So we're going to go to Starfall, we'll probably meet Wyla, we'll hear some weird things, and that will help set up the reveal, which I think will also probably come in the Winds of Winter, of Jon's biological parentage.
Ah, yes. Now, I very much agree with that, and because of those key plot points that's the core of this, is the beginnings of the story, Jon's parentage, Ned's mysteries, Willa, all that stuff is super important and completely unresolved still. And it did begin there. And as you said, George definitely has had to change his plans midstream. In fact, even one of the blurbs at the end of the one of the books even says on the back, it's like that the events that will culminate at Starfall. It's like, will they? That was like on the back of one of the books, the jackets or something like that, like a long time ago.
The same one with the Seas of Winterfell.
It might have been the shore, the shores of winter. Yeah, jeez, man, come on, guys, read the book a little bit before you write a description of it. So. That's a really, really good set of possibilities. So I think we have to go to Starfall. You're right. And you're also right about the Edric Dayne stuff. I completely agree. It's interesting that George is giving us kind of instead of this, he was building Edric to be like this perfect kid, right? Like really like the Sword of the Morning, like an honorable, unassuming, humble, but possibly badass, probably badass. If he's going to wield Dawn, he's badass. Yeah.
He's already badass. He stayed by Beric during the battle and fought off people.
You're right.
So he's already badass.
You're right. He's already there. He was set up. He was headed in that direction, and he was like, "I'm going to be the Sword of the Morning." And George is like, "Actually, sorry, kid. I don't know about that. 5-year gap."
He's probably as tall as Dawn.
Yeah.
So obviously, if Dark Star came in and he was added and he's darker than Edric would have been conceivably, is that at all possible that the 5-year gap would have had things go poorly for Edric so that he was in a little bit of a darker spot? Because I tend to think of him as such a pure, wholesome boy that nothing could happen to him. But 5 years, the Brotherhood without banners has broken up.
Huh.
It might not have gone great for him.
He wouldn't be as bad as Darkstar, but he might have gotten, he might be like traumatized or darker. Yeah, that's an interesting idea. I don't know. It's definitely a different character.
It may have even had sort of shades of what Brienne explores about knighthood in A Feast for Crows, where it's not that Brienne becomes a bad person, by no means, but she's going through really hard things in that book.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. That's a good call, Shea. I never thought about like considering, because they just seemed like night and day, which is like the idea, like Night and Dane, and they're
if they are like night and day, that would make you think that he planned on Dark Star before the 5-year gap, which I don't think we know that he didn't. He might have, right?
Yeah, there's a chance. I would definitely guess not, but you're right, there is a chance. Okay, well, here's my goofy theory, because why not? Let's have some fun here. I'm not sure I've ever said this one on the podcast before. Maybe I have like a long time ago. I don't know. We've been doing this a while. So the idea was that it's not a pattern, but it could be a pattern, that we started the second book with a Maester prologue and the fourth book with a Maester in training prologue. So maybe the sixth book would start with the Maester. Doesn't seem likely. It could be. But if it happened a third time, then we probably could call it a pattern. But the idea would have been, my idea was a Maester at Starfall would be how we get the prologue. So the Maester at Starfall is there. He's just chilling. He's looking at Dawn on the wall where it sits, and all of a sudden it just ignites. It just turns on like Lightbringer, and just like he's like, oh, and like he's the only one that sees it, And it's like, I don't think the sword works like that, but
I'm just imagining that Dawn is in a box, and the box is labeled "In case of apocalyptic crisis, please break glass."
In case of long night, yeah. Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, so obviously this idea of mine was something like 20 years ago. Like this was pre-Feast for Crows. This was pre-Dark Star even. So no, it wasn't it couldn't have been pre-Feast for Crows if I was including the Maester idea. So it must have been pre-Dance with Dragons, but post-Feast for Crows. So it's probably around 2000, so maybe only 15 years old as a theory. Anyway. Super chat from TKOK Podcast Network says, loved all the sample chapter episodes and guests. Very fitting and wonderful to have Nina to wrap it up. Two of the brightest minds in the fandom on display today. Thank you very much, Tommy. And that is an
Well, who's the second one? You're one. Who's the second one?
And so Tommy is going to be our guest next week. We have an episode planned called The Lost Valyrian Steel. Mostly weapons, but not entirely weapons. There's some other non-weapon Valyrian steel things that we'll talk about. So that'll be fun. And that's next Sunday. So that's the 20th. Yeah, for people not watching live. So back to what we were saying about Bran and POV options. It's a good segue to talk about where that's a big thing that's happening in the books. Like the supernatural's always been a part of the story. But it's gradually increased in frequency and intensity. Ned Stark is a favorite example of mine. The dude is super important to the story, of course. Like he's a seminal, important character. He's an example. There's still his effect is still being felt in the storyline. His people are still fighting for his family and for his children and all that. And he was not to be denied.
He has to cross over the laptop to get into this box he really likes.
I was trying to stop him, and he was like, nope, I win. I'm going this way.
No.
So Jakin typed a few things on the keyboard. I seem to have deleted them now. All right. He's just staring at me like, yeah, I win. I'm in the box now. I win. Okay, so he made me go all the way back up to the top. Okay, anyway. So Ned Stark, in his entire 15 or however many chapters, what supernatural things happen in his chapters? Anything? There's nothing. So that's a good example of that. And then it obviously builds up. We talked about in Clash of Kings, it starts with Bran starts getting his wolf dreams. It really picks up. But even by the end of A Dance with Dragons, most of the POVs only have a little bit of supernatural or almost none going on. Just among these sample chapters, just these sample chapters that we've seen so far, ones that are only set up. Remember, we were talking about that before. These aren't even the meat of the book, yet they still have huge amounts of supernatural. Like Nightford and Hardhome are a reminder that we're headed towards new levels of supernatural. And again, I've said this before, but it bears repeating. Most of it was left out of the TV show. Most of the supernatural stuff that George planned for the books, the TV show guys were like, we're just going to drop that. So that's going to be a lot of unexpected twists and details and lore and epic mystery that we just can't predict. And that fits really well with the we have no idea what's coming type attitude. This really backs that argument up, I think. But for the first time, I think we can say we have overtly supernatural things happening in almost every single plot line on the regular, instead of just every once in a while here and there. You know, Bran chapters have constant supernatural stuff, but there's not that many Bran chapters. Bran's presence seems to be a part of the Theon chapter via the Ravens and or nearby Heart Tree. Euron's battle plan involves, well, we'll see, but there's blood and priests and artifacts and magical drugs and the shadow of the old gods on him too, right? Not just all this other stuff. Not to mention the place he seems to be aiming for, where Sam is unknowingly dealing with, you know, ancient texts and an actual faceless man in close proximity. Arya's also, of course, dealing with faceless men, but her plot line is also gaining more magic steam, right? She's closer to the inner sanctum than she's ever been, and she's having dreams of Nymeria, and she's skin changed a cat, right? Like, this is definitely on the rise in her perspective. Even Arianne's chapters, not exactly chock full of eldritch delvings, but we got both ends of it in a sense, right? We got the old gods in those caves that she went down to, that forest of stone trees where they're like, oh, this is creepy, and it's a really interesting scene. And then the chapter before that, she's face to face with the dragon dreamer in Dorne. So, you know, she's warning that the dragons are coming. That's pretty interesting. And it's very, very much supernatural. And Arianne's headed to deal with a faction partly led by a man secretly concealing a magical disease, which originated thanks to the dragons coming, just like the bit in Dorne. So, yeah. And then, of course, we have Slaver's Bay. They're engaged in warfare, which isn't supernatural, but there's dragons overhead, and there's a dragon horn wielded by a pirate lord with a flaming arm coming, or has arrived already. So that's pretty supernatural. And then Makoro is there. Really, only Sansa is the only one that we've really seen that you could say maybe there's no magic at all in her chapter yet. But everything in her arc is pointing towards heading to the north, where there's going to be plenty of that to go around. So, I mean, not to mention that the others, seems like the name of the book is really pointing towards a lot more of them. We haven't even mentioned Jon and his undeadness and his second life. Dany with her dreams and her dragon. Stoneheart, the mountain, the Kyborg, aka. Yeah, so I've said my spiel. Supernatural's all over the place. How do you react to this or feel about this? Or is there anything I missed? Or what do you have to say about that?
No, I think that there's I think that's all really good, and I think it's all very valid to point out, and I think it's always worth reminding that this is a fantasy series. It's a fantasy series that cares about its world building. It's a fantasy series that likes to spend time on the political side and, you know, describing various aspects of its world. But this is, at the end of the day, a fantasy series, and it's a fantasy series where the main conflict, the real only conflict that matters, is the war between humanity and an unseelie court-esque race of ice monsters who want to destroy and enslave everything we know as life. So there's there's no getting away from the fantasy. There is no putting aside the fantasy and saying, well, this part of the book is a fantasy and this part of the book isn't. Everything is going to tie into the fantasy. Everything is going to reflect that in some way. And I think you are going to see more of it in the Winds of Winter because, you know, I said this before and I'll say it again. We're in Act 3 at this point. We're in the climax stage. So this is where that central conflict is going to come to the fore and is going to be the most prominent. So yeah, I think we're going to see even more supernatural. I think it's going to be even more in your face. And I think that's really clearly pointed out by these sample chapters.
Right on. Well said.
I have a question. You said you think Sansa will have the least amount of magic.
Well, I was saying currently, yeah.
Currently. My question, I posed it to the chat as well. Do you think Sansa will skin change again?
Ooh.
Like, again, I say, will she skin change?
I would guess no. But,
some people think she might into a bird because there's so much bird imagery for her.
Oh, yeah.
I could see it. George R. R. Martin has been very clear that all of the Stark kids are skin changers, and it's something that Sansa is not completely averse to. She's just had the least experience and the least opportunity for experience with. So, if she were put in a situation where she was made more aware of her own ability to skin change, maybe.
Yeah.
Do I think that that's sort of the main point of Sansa as a character? Probably not. But I could see it happening.
Yeah, and it's almost like it's interesting too because like the veil, as we talked about at the time when we talked about this Elaine chapter, it's almost like there's like it's in its own bubble. Like and we talked as well about how the werewoods won't grow there. So it is like it's almost like a magical dead zone in a sense. But she's leaving there. She's going to leave there. So. If it's going to happen, it probably wouldn't have happened there. But when she leaves, yeah, maybe. One other thing to add here is that George is, of course, the core of the story. You're right, as far as the plot line is the others. This is the big thing we're building up to, and then whatever happens after that, which will be very substantial as the Westeros picks itself back up again, or whatever. But of course, it's very much told through characterizations, the POV style. And how the characters deal with this conflict. So I think what George has done is he's brought this along slowly to show how these characters are, to show how they behave, to get how they behave in situations that we're at least somewhat familiar with. I mean, we haven't fought in civil wars, probably, most of us, or any of us, but we have dealt with relationships and politics and normal human situations that come up in these books. If we were just to start off with things like what Waymar Royce faced, or Garrett, like we would have very little perspective for like, I wonder how, I know how he feels, but we've gotten to know Jon and Dany and Sansa and all these characters. And so when they start to interact with things that we just can't conceive of in our own world, we have this basis for their personality, and it will allow George to have these characters react in ways that we find satisfying. We find realistic based on the personalities he's given them over quite a while of build-up. And that's important. These characters, we know them very well, so we have sort of expectations for how they may react to certain stimuli. But when the stimuli is something like vast and unknowable and dangerous and evil and dark, and that, well, even that we can't predict. And that is interesting. And gives us lots of curiosity. Okay, let us, unless you have anything else to add, Nina or Asha, let's move on.
No.
Cool. Let's do the Riverlands / Westerlands prologue. This is pretty exciting. We've got a few details. We've been able to think through some things here, and we've come up with some things that I haven't seen talked about elsewhere. So maybe we will introduce you to some new thoughts here. One thing very important here, we know from George directly, he said it, that Jane Westerling will be in this prologue. That tells us a lot. Be in, probably not be the prologue, or probably not be the POV herself. So that narrows it down a bit. We also have a few other details. So I'm going to lay out some details, and then I'm going to turn it over to Nina, and we will discuss the possibilities. Jaime, to back it up, what happened was Jaime sends Sir Forley Prester, 400 men and some knights to escort Jane Westerling, Edmure Tully, Sybil Spicer, Gawain Westerling, and one other Westerling as well, right? Is there like a daughter or someone there? I forget.
I'm sorry, I didn't. The mic cut out.
It was Jane. It's
asking?
Jane, Edmure, Sybil, Gowan, and there's like another.
And then their other two children,
Right.
Alina and Rolam.
Right. I couldn't remember their name. Alina and Rolam. That's right. And of course there was the.
I told you, I'm the memory person.
That's right. See, yeah. And then we also have a character named White Smile Watt. I'll talk about him more in a minute. Rosalind Frey is not there. Rosalind Frey is at the Twins. She's pregnant, and Jaime told her she could join Edmure at Casterly Rock after the birth. So where they're headed is they're headed west to Casterly Rock, but also to the Crag. Right, the Westerlings are going back to their castle, and Forley Prester is leading Edmure and that group to Casterly Rock for him to take up his imprisonment. So that's the setup basically for the party. Now Jaime's very worried about what could happen to this party, and we are right there with you, Jaime. I don't know about worried, but more like excited. So there's a couple of possibilities, though. It's very interesting. One thing to keep in mind is that Stoneheart just basically ambushed Jaime with Brienne's assistance, blackmail, whatever. You forced her to help. So they're probably not a part of this. They're like on the way to King's Landing, whereas this party's going the opposite way. So while Jaime and his group headed east back towards King's Landing, this group is heading west. Also very, very important, Kevin Lannister in his epilogue, actually before his epilogue, he tells Cersei, right, that Jaime went off with some woman. We know who that was, but he doesn't. So they've already gotten news that Jaime disappeared. But whatever happened to this group, no news has reached King's Landing, which by itself is very telling. It might mean the entire party was wiped out, which if that happened, that's a lot of people. We just had 400 men and some knights, which is wow. I mean, even outside Winterfell, when Ramsay slaughtered all those people, a few of those guys got away, right? Yeah, a few people escaped that. A few people escaped the Red Wedding, so wiping everyone out is difficult. But if the people that escaped were just a few nobodies, they may not have been able to tell anyone important. Maybe news hasn't reached. I don't know. But it's something to factor in, very importantly. So we have a possibility. Different people who could attack the train, different people who want different things to worry about. We'll start off by talking about what might happen, and then we'll move on to who we think the POV is going to be. Nina, let's take it away.
Yeah, so I think you really nicely laid out, in terms of kind of the setup for this, and that goes straight into what's going to happen. And I think it's pretty widely accepted, and I think a correct thought at this point that there's going to be an attack on this train by the Brotherhood without banners. Jaime 7 really, really, really strongly implies this. First, we have Jaime thinking about Forley Prester's men. He thinks that he's taking 100, and Jaime thinks, no, actually, we should be doubling that. And then he meets up with Forley later and notes Forley didn't just double it. Forley quadrupled it. We've got 400 men. There's really no reason for the author to twice hang a lampshade on that if he's going to say, and actually there was no conflict and there was no reason to have extra men and it was totally fine. He's setting up the idea there is going to be an armed conflict here. That's the paranoia is real here. It's a real basis. And what's Dany specifically worried about? He's worried not only that there's going to be an attack, he thinks it's going to be by Brynden or Lord Beric, neither of whom I think are actually going to be involved. Well, Beric can't be because he's actually dead.
Yeah.
I don't think
this goes to show Jaime's intelligence is a little behind, yeah.
But he's worried that someone is going to try and break out Edmure, Jane, or both. And that's not an illogical reasoning. Yeah. If you have the rightful Tully Lord of Riverrun, Jaime already knows, thanks to the conversation he had at Derry, that the Riverlords are not happy about this situation. He knows that certain Riverlords have been actively helping the Brotherhood without banners. They're clearly not happy with the Freys and Lannisters being in charge of the situation. If they know that the rightful Tully Lord of Riverrun is being transported, yeah, it's not a bad thought that someone's going to try and break him out. Even more so, if they know that Robb's widow is traveling with them, very easy possibility to think someone's going to try and break her out and someone's going to present any baby as her and Rob's baby and continue the fight against the Baratheon Lannister regime. So, yeah, Jaime's not illogical in thinking that someone would try to break them out. So he talks to Forley, and Forley says, "Oh, don't worry. If Edmure steps 1 foot off the train, I'm going to shoot him." And Jaime thinks, yeah, that's a good idea. And also, make sure you do the same to Jane, because she's really, really dangerous. Yeah. That to me suggests something is going to happen with one or both of them in this. Because, again, there's really no reason to point that out unless something was going to come up later with them. Yeah. So, yeah, there's going to be an attack. Something is going to go down. It's not going to be pretty.
It is not. Yeah, so let's think about who could be the POV, and then we'll come back. That'll illuminate some of the other possibilities for how we expect this to play out and how it can be presented. Now, as we said, it probably won't be Jane. One of the early predictions, possibilities, ideas that popped up when George spoke on this was Sir Forley himself. I don't really think that's terribly likely. Jaime describes Sir Forley as really solid. He's a good choice for this thing because he's not, he's normal. He's boring. And that's what you want for this. You want boring, someone who follows orders, someone who's not going to be too imaginative or clever, someone who just does what he's told, which doesn't make for a great POV. Although it could. I mean, we're just witnessing action here potentially that could work out. But I think there's some more compelling possibilities. Edmure himself, probably not. He's probably not going to be too privy to the he's probably too much of a prisoner to be able to see what's happening, for one thing. White Smile Watt is an option here. He's a singer who's been with the Lannister army like this whole time. He was with Tywin's army at Harrenhal. We've been hearing about White Smile Watt since Clash of Kings. So he probably isn't anyone important, but given that George, he's kind of a person who's not directly attached to any of the politics around here. He's kind of a guy in the middle.
Does White Smile Watt just like have a toothbrush?
Yeah, how does he have such white teeth?
What makes him special?
So there's also a small chance he's an informer or a spy. Like, you always got to worry about that with singers because they get to go places that they sometimes have access to things that other people don't have. They get to be at court and they get to hear things. So other possibilities, like I said, if we go back to my silly Dawn idea that I had 15 years ago, we could have a maester traveling in this group as our POV. That seems a little random for that. I don't know why we need a maester for this to tell us this bit, but it's worth mentioning. Someone else in the Brotherhood Without Banner, someone who gives us a front row seat to the attack, could be interesting if that's what's going to happen. But I also Blackfish, right? Blackfish is a possibility. Although I think that's not likely because the prologue characters so far have all died, and I think that would be kind of a strange way to have the Blackfish die, given that he escaped for this larger role only to die during the first thing he does afterwards. That doesn't work too well for me. I've got one more off the cuff possibility, but I want to save that for last because I think your idea is the one I prefer now. So I'm going to let you run with it because there's a lot of reasons this fits really well. And I think we can say more about just this one option than we've said about all these other options put together because it fits so well. Of course, given that lead in, George will be like, no, of course not. Like, no, no, this is a really good idea. So Nina, break us in on this great idea, and then we'll tell everybody why it fits so well.
Don't set me up too much. No, I think the idea that I like most, and you're absolutely right, I'm saying it, which means that it will not happen. But the idea that I like the most is that the POV character is Sybil Spicer. And I think that this would be interesting for a lot of different reasons. Sybil is a very different kind of POV character than we've had. Certainly we've never had a woman as a prologue or epilogue POV. But even beyond that, Sybil is very different from all the other female POVs that we have. With the probable exception of Melisandre, who was sold as a slave at some point, but otherwise her background's pretty cryptic.
Yeah.
Every single
put that one on hold.
Female every single female POV we've had is a woman or child from the upper echelon of Westerosi aristocracy. Yeah. They're all, which is not to say that their lives have always been luxurious or always easy. Certainly not. But they're all very much aware that they're blue bloods. They're all very much aware, our families have been the ruling class in Westeros and for Daenerys and Valyria for thousands of years. There is no question of what our place in the social order is. And they have certain expectations of the universe because of that privilege. But Sybil is not. Sybil is very different. Sybil is a woman who is on the lowest rung of Westerosi aristocracy. She is second generation nobility. And she knows this is something that's very much looked down upon in Westeros. People consider her family up-jumped merchants. People consider her children have doubtful blood because of her. People feel bad for Gowan for having to had marry her, in their minds. So she knows this is something that's looked down upon, and this is something that influences her decisions. I'm not by any means saying you need to feel sympathetic for Sybil, but you can have a POV character who is ultimately unsympathetic, but still has a complex and interesting history.
Yeah, it's if I could jump in just for a second, I want to point out this is part of what made Sybil and Walder Frey get along. I think is part of what helped this arrangement form in the first place. Of course, they didn't. She was more dealing with Tywin, but the fact is that Frey himself is very much of the same. Like they look down on us. Like pride. It's a big deal to him. So like that really their hatred of how they're treated while wanting to be a part of the people hating them is a very familiar aspect or topic that has come up a lot. Please continue.
Absolutely, and I think that Sybil exploring that could be really, really interesting. What was it like for Sybil growing up? How did she meet Gowan? How did she marry him? What did she think of everything that happened? Does she have any regrets, or does she think my children would never have gotten this far without me doing what I did? I had to do what I had to do, or else my children would have been, languishing in, basically obscurity among the nobility. I don't know, and it's interesting to explore. And that kind of leads to the other next point of why I think Sybil is interesting, which is if there's anyone that can be considered the winner of this train, Sybil's the winner. Corley and his men, this is just all in a day's work for them. They're just, keeping up the Lannister regime. That's part of the job description. Edmure's certainly not winning here. Gowan is, it has the same rewards as Sybil, but he also spent most of the War of the Five Kings as a prisoner of war. So, not exactly great. Jane's certainly not happy for good reason. Yeah. And I don't think the younger kids really have a lot of say on any of this. But Sybil's really won. She lost her oldest son, certainly, and that's not something to be glossed over. But her children, or her daughters, are promised to lords or heirs. Her brother's been made lord of a very ancient seat. They've been completely pardoned by the Lannisters. There's going to be no retribution. She's won. So the person, it might go without saying, but the person who loses the most is the person with the most to lose. If there's going to be an attack on this train, then the most interesting viewpoint might be from the person who has the most to lose here, and that's Sybil. And the other point why I think Sybil is an interesting choice is that I do think Sybil is doomed. I don't think that anyone who's involved in the Red Wedding is escaping sort of divine punishment. there's no sort of crossing that line and coming back from it. And certainly Sybil didn't, actively plan the logistics of the Red Wedding, but she knew Robb was going to die, and she was part of that plan. So Sybil is doomed, and I think she's doomed in kind of a very specific way, which is if we can consider Sybil's crime, for lack of a better term, I'm not sure exactly what you'd call it, but if Sybil's crime is, I prevented Robb from having children so that my own children could advance, then what is sort of the contrapasso punishment for Sybil? It's you will have no descendants, you will have no heirs, you will see your own children die because you prevented Robb from ever having heirs of his own. So yeah, I think that Sybil is doomed, and I think that not only is she going to die, but I think her kids are going to die. It's already been very heavily foreshadowed that something's going to happen that would make Forley shoot Jane. And is it impossible to believe that the kids would be caught in the crossfire? I don't think so. They're right there.
They are right there. Yeah, I think this whole bit with Maggie the Frog is super interesting. You're right. That is one of the
Right.
that is super.
That was something I didn't even point out, which is
yeah.
part
Tell
that
us
I
about
forgot.
that. This is huge. Yeah, this is a really big deal.
Right. So Sybil obviously is Maggie's granddaughter. Sybil's father is Maggie's son by the Spicer merchant. So if anyone, if this is the book where Cersei's prophecies with Maggie the Frog come to fruition, and I think that it is. It's been what 16 years since we've had Maggie the Frog's prophecies. Probably would do to have a refresher, just a little bit of a mention to get the brain thinking of, oh, right, Maggie the Frog. I remember her. I remember what that was. It doesn't have to be that Sybil says, and here's what Maggie the Frog told Cersei. She just has to name drop Maggie the Frog and say she was a fortune teller to be able for the reader to say, oh, right, and Maggie was the one who told Cersei how it was gonna go down.
And what did she tell Cersei?
It's very natural for Sybil to think because, again, Maggie's her grandmother.
Yeah.
Who else would think of her?
It's so perfect, yeah, and it's not just that, but as if we're one thing we can feel pretty confident about is your estimation that Sybil will not escape justice for the Red Wedding. So if she's gonna die, this is the only chance and the only character that can really tell us about Maggie the Frog other than Cersei, who's already told us what we need to know. And it's the last chance to do that. Not only is she the only character that can do it, but it's the only chance to do it. It's not like she's going to become a POV later. That's not on the table. George has said there won't be new POVs other than, prologue, epilogue type stuff. So that's that. It really just eliminates the possibility. If he's going to do it, it has to be now. And wow, does that set up exactly what's happening with Cersei? It's such a brilliant parallel. You've got the woman who's the granddaughter of the person who gave this prophecy to Cersei. The prophecy states that Cersei's victories will turn to ashes in her mouth, which is what you just made a point of saying. Sybil just won. And she's like, right when she's got these victories, she's like, yep, I win. Right when her joy turns to ashes in her mouth. It's setting up to do that right here in this prologue. And it sets up Cersei herself having that happen later in the book as a lead into that. It's an amazing set of parallels created by this character being the POV, the things she can think about, the things she set up, the things that are going to happen to a more important character in this book, Cersei, or losing her kids. Yeah, wow, that is really, really strong.
And of course, both Sybil and Cersei have already lost an oldest son, so even more of a parallel.
That is very true. Yeah, and like, shout out to Gawain Westerling himself. Like you said, he spent most of the war in prison. He's like, we have no idea what he thinks about all. He's probably like, I can't believe you did that, woman. Like, how did you arrange that? Or he might be like, actually, well played. Like, I have no idea what he thinks.
Yeah, I'm not entirely. I don't know how to feel about Gawain, considering the only response we get about Gawain is from Kevin Lannister, noted war criminal, saying that he's a good man. So I'm not sure that's really an endorsement of Gawain.
So let me introduce another concept here and another possible character that could be the POV. This would be a little unique, a little different, but it's maybe already set up by the possibility of what we saw at the beginning of Dance with Dragons with having a Varamir POV, which is the idea that Nymeria will be in this chapter. The tinfoil idea is that she would be the actual prologue character. That's probably too much. George writing a whole chapter from a wolf POV, probably not going to happen, but it is got to be considered. I also will repeat a theory I posted, I think, during the Mercy chapter, or suggested during the Mercy chapter, which is that I think if the prologue contains Nymeria, which I think it will, as we'll lay out some evidence for, Mercy chapter starts with a wolf dream. She's just, it's the first thing that happens. She's waking up. She's feeling like she was just chasing people. There was blood. There was prey. It could be the prologue and then right into Mercy, with the wolf pack being kind of the last thing we see. And the way I think this really fits nicely is if you look around at the rest of the book and what we're seeing, looking at prominent themes that appear in the other sample chapters, and prologues often make grand statements about the rest of the book they're kicking off. For example, we just talked about how big a deal Varamir's chapter set up what was going on there, and the setup for the others in the first book, etc. It's huge, right? there's a reason why the prologues are so important. The reason why the Clash of Kings prologue is the longest chapter in all of the books. One of the early themes of the Winds of Winter chapters is prey becoming the predator or hunter becoming the hunted, depending on which metaphor you prefer. They're pretty much the same concept. For example, the Yunkish go from besiegers to trapped between two armies. Victarion lured them in part by looking like helpless fishing boats and such. Stannis aims to look like a helpless prey to a fray predator, but it's a lure. His weakness is bait to get them into a location where they can be killed easily. Wrath the Sweetling thinks he's on the hunt, when he's actually being lured to a location where he can be killed easily. Barristan leads his men towards the strongest enemies, only to veer off at the last moment to attack the weakest enemies, right? He pretended to go for the strong ones and then went for the weak point. Tyrion and Jorah engineer a switching of sides, culminate with a literal backstabbing, actually through the neck. But it's as that guy falls, he turned the table. He hit a side-vast board and turned it over. So it's like, yeah, turning the tables. George was all over the metaphors in that scene. We might also see Darkstar turn the tables on the ones sent to bring him to justice. Like, that's a theory that's been out there. Victarion strikes the Yunkish lines from behind. Manderley will probably strike the Freys from behind. The Friends in the Reach will quite possibly stab the Tyrell forces from behind while they're facing the Golden Company. The Redwyne and Hightower fleets aim to trap Euron's fleet, but they are aware of this plan and remember how the one guy's laughing about being taken in the rear, and they know it's coming. It's a lure. They're planning on just Krakens or whatever. And instead of an attack from behind, it's an attack from below. Same basic concept. So that's like all of the parallel. That's like all these chapters. In every single example here, we have this thing happening. So to reconcile the notion that this prologue will contain the wolf pack with the possibility that the prologue will contain the Brother Without Banners, perhaps it will contain both. Imagine that while the Brotherhood Without Banners is stalking the Westermen, the wolves are stalking the Brotherhood. It would nail a theme we somewhat expect to be central to this book: humanity caught fighting itself when the old god's revenge comes down on them. This would be kind of a microcosm of that. Instead of the others sweeping down on the north while it's engaged in the Stark succession crisis or what have you, you've got this smaller version of that, two small factions going at it while the wolves sweep over them all. That's exactly what happened in the very first prologue of the first book. Sir Waymar and his company are looking for wildling raiders. They're trying to attack some free folk that attack them, and the others come down on them. We've been seeing this pattern since the very beginning. We even saw it in Daznak's pit. We got a boar killed Barcena only for a dragon to come kill the boar. Yeah, we've just been seeing this all along. So what do you think about, like, do you think the wolf pack will appear in this chapter at all? Or do you think maybe that's just something else that we can't, it's too hard to mash these two ideas together? Or what does this all do for you?
Hard to say. Yeah, hard to say, because the one thing that I would want to, and George R. R. Martin is obviously a better writer than I am, so he could probably think of a way that this would be creative. But my concern would be, would this be too complicated? That you've got the train, and then there's an attack on the train, and then there's also an attack by wolves. And then wolves. So I don't know. I could see it happening. I could also see it where it's just an attack on the train, and then that sets up the idea that, because I think you're absolutely right in terms of saying the prologue chapters set up these themes and these ideas that are explored through the rest of the book. Totally correct. I think no matter what happens, part of the theme that's going to be set up is that this is the book where, the settling of old scores, the vengeance for things that came before. I think we're going to see a lot of that. We're already seeing a lot of it, and we're going to see more of it through each of the POVs. So seeing kind of this, and now we're getting sort of a retribution directly for the Red Wedding, nicely sets up if there's going to be, bigger, again, Red Wedding 2.0 or whatever it's going to be in the Riverlands. We've got that with Targaryen, restoration, so to speak, in King's Landing, and the Stark restoration in Winterfell, and a lot of old things. So whether or not the wolves are involved, I think the wolves will be involved somehow in this book. If it's in the prologue, if it's in a different POV, I don't know, but somewhere there will be wolves.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about. Here's a question from Patreon. Patron screenwriter Catherine Van Pelt brought up an interesting possibility. So we've sort of talked about the possibility that the Blackfish will hook up with the Brotherhood. But what if he doesn't? What if he's operating independently with just his own men that he's able to recruit from the countryside, and they're not connected? That's another possibility of like two different factions operating in concert here, or not in concert, and they end up with lots of chaos, right? They end up attacking this train at the same time. Like the ambush spot is a good ambush spot, so they both pick the same place, which could be which leads to some of the same potentials that you laid out, like some of the people they're trying to rescue actually getting killed or being killed by Forley Prester because it's part of his orders. That could make this level of confusion could certainly cause Sir Forley to just be like, no taking chances, just got to push the panic button here, got to push the eject button. Mass amounts of chaos, whether there's wolves involved or not, that's the kind of situation where you could definitely see people getting shot by accident, people killing their friends by accident, just panic, mass chaos. Yeah, which also makes it extremely hard to predict if it's even what's going to happen. But we know some kind of thing is going to happen. We know this group is in big trouble. That part of the prediction seems like the safest thing. Who's coming for them? Well, we named 3 different possibilities, all of whom are somewhat related. And we've even talked through the possibility of multiple of them coming at the same time. We haven't posited all 3. Okay, let's say Blackfish has his own group, the Brotherhood have their own group, and the Wolves. All 3 attack this party at the same time. Now that's a bit much even for me, but... but what you're saying about how the party, there's no news of this, has reached King's Landing, that's part of why the wolf pack is an interesting possibility to add to this, is that is wolves are an element that I could see being responsible for no one getting out alive. Because if people can run away, 100%. Wolves can chase people down better than other people can.
Right. No, I 100% agree with that. And it could be, and again, it's hard because we don't know what the timing of this is relative to anything else. And it's not like George R. R. Martin is always the best with timing.
True,
so
fair point. Yes, fair point.
but it is a very fair point that even if the wolves don't attack the train directly, the fact that there is an enormous wolf pack, this is what we see, we even saw this with, Arya chasing down some of the bloody mummers as Nymeria and the rest of the wolves, is that individual bands are not going to do very well against a lot of very hungry, very angry wolves.
Yeah, and you're right. Like, that's a very important point to keep in mind. The wolves are drawn towards these groups of people. Like, that is well established. Nymeria, like normal wolves, they keep their distance. This wolf pack is aggressive. They're picking at the edges. They're looking for stragglers. They're attacking horses. So the idea that they would be drawn to a large army makes total sense, because armies leave bits of food. I mean, it's the whole concept of how humanity and dogs got together in the first place. Dogs would hang out with humans because humans would leave parts of the animal uneaten, and dogs would be like, I'll take that. And a friendship developed. A friendship for the ages. Yeah. So that's the same basic concept here. Wolves hanging around people, dogs hanging around where people are because they know there's going to be food. In this case, there's going to be bodies. There's going to be corpses, lots of blood. So
people as food.
Yes, it's both. Very good. All right. So people as food, of course, that's also a big topic for the Winds of Winter, cannibalism, starvation, something that the armies in the north are already facing, which is a good segue for us to talk about the Asha fragment. The Asha fragment. It is, for those who aren't super aware of what this is, several years ago, George gave like an interview, and he had a picture taken with him in front of his actual work computer while he was apparently actually working, because there was a page of the Winds of Winter on screen on his Bank Street Writer or Word Perfect, whatever it is, his old computer. It's not connected to the internet. Smart call, by the way. Don't keep that thing on the internet. No one can steal it. So, no viruses. You just can't make a mistake.
Yeah, and honestly, sometimes when we're typing our episodes and stuff like that, and we get the little lines to correct us, George doesn't have to deal with that.
Yeah, that's true.
Just
he doesn't like autocorrect. He's like, no, I'm like, it would get frustrating when you're writing a fantasy series with words like R'hllor and Targaryen. It's like, nope, that's the word. Nope, don't try to correct that. Nope. Those are real words. So basically it was like a zoom and enhance type situation where people were looking at that screen. Like, it was an actual screenshot, a different manner of speaking, And it was really tempting to play Mad Libs with this because there's words no one could ever make out, but there's too many blanks in a row. So I considered that, but let's read what we have. Do you want to read it, Shay?
Sure. Brackets, daughter of the Lord Reaper of Pike, Asha thought, as she took a bracket of at the land. The leader of the enemy wore silvered plate and mail inlaid with detail of lapis lazuli. The brackets crest of his helmet / war helm was tall ? Fashioned in the shape of the twin towers of House Frey. Before him rode 3 banner bearers. One bore the stag and lion standard of King Tommen, another the twin towers of House Frey. The third brandished a bloody head impaled upon the point of a tall spear. An old man's head it was, white-bearded and one-eyed. The spear was... blank. I'm going to fill this one with rubber.
The spear
was rubber with a pale wood, almost white. It says blank along its upper shaft had blank dark and red.
Bouncy.
Bouncy?
Because it's rubber, yeah.
Okay.
A bouncy werewood spear.
Okay. Crowfood umber, Asha knew. The old Northman had fought to his death, it seemed. Perhaps the foe had thought the sight of the severed head would take the heart of the... They rush together like a lot of question marks in here. If you could see me, you would see that I have a lot of big gestures.
Yeah, she's gesturing like this, like spaces. There's blanks here. Imagine, use your imagination. So, of course, I'm wearing my It's Always Sunny Fight Milk shirt, which gives you the power of a crow. So it was kind of in honor of Crowfood Umber and his death. Also to shout out to our good friend Amanda, Crowfood's daughter. She'll carry on his legacy. We did that episode with her on Giants, and we've got more coming in the future. So, yeah, Crowfood Umber dead. That's pretty clear. We barely knew Ye Crowfood, but he did live a long life. He wasn't a young man. I guess, this was foreshadowed. Kind of obliquely, kind of indirectly, like George likes to do, kind of in a way that doesn't always look like foreshadowing, but when you see it enough times, you start to every sentence like this starts to look like foreshadowing when you read Song of Ice and Fire enough times, because he does it enough that it might mean it. Here's the line back in A Dance with Dragons. Are you there, Shay?
Yeah.
Cool.
Jon was not surprised. If it comes to swords, see where Hother's banner flies, and put Moor's on the other end of the line. The Giant Slayer disagreed. You would make his grace look weak. I say, show our strength, burn Last Hearth to the ground, and ride to war with Crowfood's head mounted on a spear as a lesson to the next lord who presumes to offer half his homage.
So this is, of course, Godry the Giant Slayer saying, in response to finding out that Morzumber is on his side, but Hother is not, they would, but only if he won't fight Umber. He had his conditions. Y'all probably remember that. So, ride to war with Crowfood's head mounted on a spear. Well, Stannis didn't do that, but obviously Hostine Frey has. So, quick question. Does this mean we will also see Last Hearth burned to the ground? Is the second half of this going to come true as well? We saw weird things at Last Hearth in the show with the spiral and the killing of that young Umber boy, and I don't know if that was just their much off the field version of what George told them. They just had to go in some weird other direction, but they still included Last Hearth because George did. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on the future of the Umbers and Last Hearth, or is this just kind of too unpredictable?
Yeah, I don't particularly see Last Hearth as being particularly important.
Yeah, right.
Maybe only in the sense that, when the wall comes down, because that's a when, not an if. Last Hearth is the first major northern castle that's probably going to be hit. So I wouldn't say that anyone at Last Hearth has a really, great odds at this point. but I wouldn't take it any farther than that. I don't think there's any deeper meaning to Last Hearth.
Okay. And I do wonder how Hother will react. Like, Hother supposedly was fighting for the Boltons, but is he mad now that they killed his brother, or was he expecting that because he is on the other side of him? But we also know that they probably had an arrangement so that one of them would be on the winning side. I wonder if his reaction will be important, or if he's just going to keep doing what he's doing, because he's kind of stuck anyway. It's not like he can, until someone beats the Boltons, he's kind of, well, what's he going to do? I mean, maybe he could turn on them too. Who knows? One thing that kind of gives me an awkward feeling is thinking about what happened to Mors's, I would say men, but they were his green boys. If Mors was killed, what happened to those dudes, those little guys? I hope they got away, but that doesn't bode well for them.
No, I don't think they got away. Yeah. And the thing is, he had like a handful of green boys, which good for digging pits. Not so good for standing up to 500 armored mounted Frank knights. There's just not really a way to win there.
Yeah.
And they may have known that. Mors may have said, "Look, we're all gonna die here, so we're either gonna die fighting the Boltons or not. Are you here or are you out?"
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't think they escaped. Hope they did, but yeah, doesn't seem great odds for them.
It's an interestingly similar question to what we were just talking about with the prologue options. And did anyone escape? Is that why news hasn't reached King's Landing? And so it's kind of a similar question. Of course, in this case, it's maybe like if one of the green boys escaped, he could run, maybe run to Stannis and warn them that they're on the march now or something like that. That's one scenario that occurred to me. And maybe Mors even ordered one of them to do that once he saw that their position was compromised or something like that. Run, go tell Stannis, something like that. So the leader of the enemy, that should be Sir Hostine, as we've said. He is AKA Sir Stupid. Interestingly, something I hadn't noticed before, his son's wife is a Royce. We don't know which branch of the Royce family. There's a couple branches. It's possibly a minor complication if the Vale Knights come north. Well, when the Vale Knights come north, because there's, this marriage clause. It's probably not going to come up because Hostine's probably going to die. But his heir is down at Castle Derry, and Castle Derry's probably in trouble too. So yeah, it just doesn't look good for the phrase, does it? Like, it's kind of an easy thing to point to, but there's digging deep. You find a lot of small examples. It's like there's so many phrases, and a lot of them are accounted for in terms of foreshadowing their deaths. Even some of these minor ones, like real minor ones.
Yeah, it's but a nickel for every time we said things aren't looking good for the phrase.
So let's take a look at this as a whole. Obviously, it's only a couple paragraphs. You can't do a whole lot with it, but even this, there's a few things we can tell, and there's some things we can read between the lines, or read between the blanks that are in the lines in this case. So what is your just overall take on this chapter, or this fragment?
Well, I think to start, and I don't know that George R. R. Martin feels this way, and if he doesn't, more power to him, but like, for me, I would feel so embarrassed if I was in the middle of writing something and then somebody started looking at it and started analyzing it. I'd be like, this isn't fit for human consumption yet. Don't look at it. It's not ready yet.
We are greedy and thirsty.
And that's the problem with this, is that because, he didn't release it and he didn't read it at a convention, he's, not even acknowledge that it really exists.
It doesn't exist.
This could be all deleted. This could not make it into the story at all.
Right.
I've deleted paragraphs that I've written, whole paragraphs. I'm sure you're exactly the same. So he could have started writing this and I hate everything I've written and get rid of it. In which case, this is all kind of moot. Now, do I necessarily think that these details won't come in anyway? No, I do think that these will come in, but it is inherently harder to speculate on this because it's something that is so uncertain that it will even be in the book in this.
Yeah,
but
like, in any event, for all we know, it could be Theon watching this instead. Like George, as we saw with the Feast for Crows prologue, George wrote multiple versions of that chapter before he set it on pen. He wrote it from Mollinder's point of view. He wrote it from Rosie's point of view. So there's not as many options here, but as you say, Asha's not the only one.
I have only one thing that I'm not in doubt of.
What's that?
It's that spear will be rubber.
That's werewood spear is really cool, and if it
You
turns
heard
out
it
to be,
here first.
yeah, well, right, rubber comes from trees. I mean, not werewoods that we know of, but hey, we don't know that much about werewoods.
Secret rubber factory. No, but I think there are kind of two, because this is so short, there's really kind of two major takeaways and then a couple things to point out of what isn't talked about here.
Yeah.
So the two kind of major takeaways are, number one, we've got Asha as at least partial POV for this battle.
Yeah.
Is that surprising to anyone? I can't imagine. It's just Asha and Theon who are physically there as POV characters. So you had a 50-50 shot of guessing, and it may be both of them in which case. So not particularly surprising that Asha is a POV for this battle. And then the other reveal is what you were talking about with Mor's Umber being dead. Again, is this surprising? I don't particularly think so. The pink letter, if we are accepting it as mostly true or based on things that Ramsay believes to be true, which I think is the most reasonable reading, then Ramsay explicitly said, I've got your false king's friends on the heads on the walls of Winterfell. Yeah, here we go. Here's a head that you can put on the wall of Winterfell. They knew Mors was a Bolton enemy. They've got him. Yeah, that makes sense. And Mors may not have even expected to live. He's an old man. He's an old man in the north. This is a good death for him. It's better to die in battle against an enemy of the Starks than, die alone in the snow sort of thing.
Yeah.
But I think important to point out is what we can't speculate on because of the shortness and the lack of detail from this chapter, which is, number one, where is Asha physically?
Yeah, how is she?
Where
is she in the tower? Like, what's going on here?
Is she in the battle? Is she on the flanks of the battle, in the reserve? Is she in the tower? Who's to say? She's clearly close enough to see it, but that could be virtually anywhere in this area. So, and that goes for her Ironborn men too. We don't know where they are either. Yeah. They could be with her. They could be in the battle. They could be back going to the Iron Islands. Who knows? So, we also don't know what happened to Asha's suggestion to Stannis to execute Theon.
Good point.
Theon chapter ends with Asha suggesting that. The Ravens take up the words, Tree and Theon. Theon says, yes, they know my name. And that's where it ends. We don't actually see that Stannis accepts this or says yes or does anything. So who's to say? We could have a Theon chapter in the middle where Stannis executes him or tries to execute him. We could have an Asha chapter before this where Stannis tries to execute Theon. Or he could say, no, I'm not going to do that. And we could move right on to the battle. Mm-hmm. There's no way to tell what happened between the end of the Theon chapter and the beginning of this battle, other than probably something, but who's to say? And then we don't know what the actual setup of this battle is. And that kind of gets into theories about the Battle of Ice, which is clearly Hostein's men are fighting somebody, but we don't actually know where Stannis has positioned his men, and because we don't know where Asha is, we don't know what vantage point she's looking at. Is she looking at the whole lake? Is she looking at part of it? Is she looking at none of it?
Yeah.
I don't know. So that really kind of leaves open the possibility, I guess is the best way to put it, for how Stannis has positioned his men, what his strategy is for this particular battle.
Certainly the trap, whatever it is, we're still under the assumption that it's an ice-like thing, hasn't been sprung yet. Certainly that is, and whatever, and if that's the case, he has allowed his troops to engage with them, which is interesting because he doesn't want his own troops to fall in the ice. So there's definitely some nuance to the strategy, or possibly something's gone wrong, or who knows. Like you said, there's just no way to know, but it is fun to point out a lot of the different possibilities to kind of give us an idea of what is out there. And also it'll be even more fun if we name a whole bunch of possibilities and comes out that it's none of them. That'll be almost, in some ways that'll be even more surprising, because we'll have like, I think we've nailed down a lot of possibilities, and well, I didn't think of that, and then boom. And of course, with George, there's going to be a lot of that. There's going to be a lot of, didn't think of that. As much as we've thought of, we should never tell ourselves that we've thought of nearly all of it. Not even close. Not even close. So yeah, that's a really excellent point about where Asha is physically and not knowing what happened after the end of that chapter. For all we know, there's a chapter in between the two. Probably not, because we know the men are on the march towards them. We know all these other things. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of time left in between this chapter and the end of Theon's chapter, but a lot can happen in a few hours too. So, Now, a lot of what this sets up, of course, is the result of this battle. We're still kind of operating under the assumption that Stannis will win, even if he doesn't, but more so if he does. It sets up the Stark convergence on Winterfell. It's very interesting how every Stark child, teenager / child, except the one who's already been king, is headed back to Winterfell, all of whom are candidates to become Lord of Winterfell, Lady of Winterfell, or perhaps even King of the North, depending on couple different scenarios, depending on who's backing them, because that's part of all this. Is it's not just the candidate, it's who's behind them. Obviously, in Sansa's case, she's got a very powerful backer who is completely untrustworthy. Wyman, Rickon has a very powerful backer who is a lot more, who's vastly more trustworthy, but also quite possibly going to be dead before Rickon even gets there. I don't know what's going to happen with Wyman, but he's not the healthiest guy, and he was just cut open in the neck area, which also is, the neck is a vital area, I guess you all probably know.
You need that to live.
You do need that to live. Yes, necks are important for human beings and most living creatures, really. Even though Hostine apparently doesn't have one, he's just his head sits directly on his shoulders. But and then of course Jon, we talked to Rob's will. Stannis prior offered him this, and then but the real trick, of course, is like the order. We can't figure out what order it's going to happen, but still there's some things we can figure out. And you've put a lot of thought into this. I think you have a lot of great ideas. Obviously, we have no idea what's really going to happen, but it's fun to suss these things out and kind of turn them over in our minds and see what comes up. So. Take it away. Tell us what you think about this situation, this vast, confusing, but very fun and interesting succession situation.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and it's very it is very interesting to me because you like you said, all of the Starks are converging on Winterfell, and the interesting part of that is that none of the plots that are aiming to restore a Stark to Winterfell are aware of any of the other plots of restoring Starks to Winterfell.
So
they all think that they're operating with the last best Stark. Stannis thinks that he's got Arya. Obviously he doesn't. But he doesn't know that Wyman thinks that he has the last legitimate son of Ned and Catelyn. Wyman doesn't know that Galbert Glover and Mage Mormont were witness to Rob's will naming an heir. Mage Mormont and Galbert Glover don't know that Littlefinger has the last, most recently verifiable legitimate child of Ned and Catelyn, planning to install her. So all of these different plots are happening, none of which are aware of the existence of the others. And that becomes a really interesting question when everyone is converging on Winterfell. What are they all going to think of everyone else converging on Winterfell? This is really going to be sort of a Spider-Man pointing at Spider-Man meme, where you've got all of these parties saying, wait a minute, I thought I had the last Stark. I thought I had the last Stark. I thought I had the last Stark. We've gone from a situation of no Stark heirs to a surplus of Stark heirs. And the other interesting thing about this is that there is no one candidate that everyone would probably agree on. Put aside the fact that everyone else has, personal ambitions and motivations in terms of, who they want to see seated in Winterfell. There is no one candidate that everyone could agree upon and say, yeah, they are the rightful heir. You take someone like Jon. What does Jon have going for him? Well, Jon was raised in Winterfell. He's a son of the former lord. He looks like Ned, which is a really, really big deal. Yeah. He's an adult, so he can take power immediately.
That's important.
And he was legitimated by Rob's will and named heir. However, Jon is bastard born. Again, he was legitimated, but it is a social it is a negative social
they still remember that he's a bastard.
This is a memory. He was also a member of the Night's Watch, and I'm I'm willing to bet that none of the precedents of removing someone from the Night's Watch involve, hey, I was dead and now I'm not.
Yeah, people are going to side-eye that for sure. They're going to be like, what do you mean you were dead? I don't even believe that. Like, what?
And also, Jon was named heir by a will that was based on a false premise, which was that Bran and Rickon were dead. Is a will still enforceable if it's based on a false premise? I don't know.
Well, we have Nina here to help, but we also need to get Learned Hands podcast.
This is a full. We need all the legal team
we'll
to
do the
assemble.
all lawyers.
Yeah, we need the full
we'll
legal
argue about
squad.
that.
Westerosi legal squad. Get on that.
So there's Jon. Then you have someone like Sansa. Well, Sansa's legitimate. She's the oldest legitimate child of Ned and Catelyn, and that's a big deal. She's also, mentioned this, she's the most recently verifiable Stark child. That was the last child that everyone knew where she was and who she was. Everyone knew up to the Purple Wedding where Sansa Stark was. But Sansa is, and she is almost an adult, so she can almost take power immediately. But Sansa is a girl, and patriarchy is going to patriarchy, especially in a castle and a family where there has literally never been a ruling woman, and they've skipped over girls to rule in favor of male heirs, including one named Sansa.
Yeah, not that long ago. Yeah,
not that long ago, relatively speaking. And Sansa will probably, I think, be married to Harold Harding / maybe Harold Arryn at that point. So there may be a sense in which she's viewed as a foreigner. You're married to a Valeman. You're bringing a foreign army. You're not Lady Stark. You're Lady Arryn or Lady Harding, however he chooses.
And she
to
looks
rule.
like a Tully, and doesn't.
And she looks like a Tully,
doesn't
which
have
is
a
something
wolf. You're right to point that out too. That's a really good call.
Also, does not have a wolf, and she's the only Stark kid who doesn't at this point. So that works against her as identifying as a Stark. Arya. Well, Arya is, again, legitimate, and she has the bonus of having that Stark look. So she looks the most, of all of the legitimate kids, she's the only one that has that look, that can say, look, I look like a Stark. And because Arya is, 11 now, she is almost of what George R. R. Martin would consider a marriageable age. I'm putting that in heavy air quotes because no one in the world would consider an 11-year-old marriageable age. But in this universe, it's not something that is looked over. So, and Arya is not married. Ramsay married Jane Poole. He did not marry Arya. So there is a sense in which any ambitious Northman can marry Arya and say, I'm going to promote her as Lady of Winterfell and rule through her.
Northern children rather than Tully Arryn children or whatever.
Northern children, good Northern blood.
It's a good marketing concept there for them.
But at the same time, Arya is young. Yeah. She is farther away from her majority, and again, she is a girl, and that's something that's going to work against her claiming power in Winterfell. Rickon is a legitimate son, and that's something that is very important. He's got both legitimacy and the male status that's going to help him. But he's also 6, and that means a 10-year regency. And regencies, as we saw in Fire and Blood, are not easy things, and they're not good things. I shouldn't say good. They're not easy things to work with, and they can lead to a lot of political chaos
dangerous
and instability.
Yeah.
Yes. And that's not something. Does someone want to trust Wyman Manderley with 10 years of power?
He won't even live 10 years probably. So you have like a whole you gotta replace him. Yeah. So you're right. That's a lot of chaos in that potential there. Yeah.
And then Bran, no one's really fighting for Bran at this point. It's not clear who knows Bran is alive. Obviously he met one of the Littles in A Storm of Swords, but A, that was back in A Storm of Swords, and B, we have no idea if that Little told anyone. Yeah. So
we would think he did, but he might decide it was a bad idea because then who other people would find out. He might be like, yeah, tell no one. It might be like Ned didn't even tell Kat about Jon. It might be kind of like one of those situations.
Well, and also, again, it was back in A Storm of Swords. There's no saying that they would think Bran was still alive if he was just out in the wilderness. But, Bran shows up. Well, again, he is legitimate, and he is the oldest legitimate male. So and he was regarded as heir to Winterfell during his lifetime by Robb. So that's an important point. But he is still young. And he is disabled in a very ableist society. Bran can ride with a very special horse with a very special saddle, neither of which he probably still has.
Yeah.
He can't fight in a traditional way. He can't lead armies in a traditional way. And that's something, it's not clear whether or not he can even have children. Maybe not. It's not clear. But this is something where they might look at him, again, in a very ableist society and say, why should we make him our leader? He can't do any of the things that we expect a Westerosi leader to do. So again, no easy answers here.
None at all.
and you're facing a situation. Now, do I think the Stark kids are going to fight among themselves? No. I think that they're just going to be happy to be together. They haven't seen each other since the Game of Thrones. They've all been through hell. They're just going to be happy to be back
they might be
seeing each other alive again.
They might be like creeped out by each other, like, Bran, what is going on with you? Or John, were you really dead? Arya, did your face just change?
John, did an eagle try to remove your eye?
Yeah, they're like a little worse for wear, but you're right. Bottom line, you're right. They'll be like,
but they are going to be happy to be together. But their factions are going to say, no, you as Lord of Winterfell, you as Lady of Winterfell, him as Lord of Winterfell. No, not him. He's not the one we should pick. She's not the one we should pick. So a lot of infighting among them. And I think the idea will be trying to figure out, hey, let's all focus here because we've got a lot bigger problems to the north that we've got deciding which one of us gets our butt on the seat of Winterfell.
And it's like, we can kind of imagine, again, we don't want to do too much of this, but if we use the show as a basic guideline, we did get a little of that. We got the Littlefinger tried to put a wedge between Arya and Sansa, and that could be like their micro version of people trying to put the Starks against each other only for it to blow up in their face. And of all the people that these people trying to foist a Stark their candidate, Littlefinger's by far the most shady, right? Like, he's way shadier than Manderly or whoever. I don't even need to make that argument. It's pretty straightforward. So he might be the key, the most operating behind these, the most aggressive at making moves here, might be why the show just reduced it to just him. But we might also see like a Glover or a man, like other people making moves here. So that's really interesting. It might be that's just the microcosm version of people trying to get the Starks to fight with each other. And so the show had them be like, no, Arya and Sansa are not going to fight. They're going to make us think they are, but they're going to unite. And maybe that's just the small version of that. And the book version will have a whole instead of just Arya and Sansa, there's like, well, whoever else will be there. Maybe Bran, maybe Rickon, maybe Jon also. Who knows? But more than just Sansa and Arya and involved in that part of things, I would like that because, the show's version of that was pretty lame. Although it was satisfying to see Littlefinger die, I would like it to be a little more built up and to see, But that's something we've talked about elsewhere and is really a whole nother topic. You also pulled this great quote from George himself, which I think maybe we should let's throw that. You want to share? You want to read this quote? That one.
Where does it start? Beginning?
Yeah. This is a bit of a lengthy quote, but this is George's direct words on succession.
The laws of inheritance in the Seven Kingdoms are modeled on those in real medieval history, which is to say they were vague, uncodified, subject to varying interpretations, and often contradictory. A man's eldest son was his heir, after that, the next eldest son, then the next, etc. Daughters were not considered while there was a living son, except in Dorne, where females had equal right of inheritance according to age. After the sons, most would say that the eldest daughter is next in line. But there might be an argument from the dead man's brothers, say. Does a male sibling or a female child take precedence? Each side has a claim. What if there are no children, only grandchildren and great-grandchildren? Is precedence or proximity the more important principle? Do bastards have any rights? What about bastards who have been legitimized? Do they go in at the end after the trueborn kids, or according to birth order? What about widows? And what about the will of the deceased? Can a lord disinherit one son and name a younger son as heir, or even a bastard? There are no clear-cut answers, either in Westeros or in real medieval history. Things were often decided on a case-by-case basis. A case might set a precedent for later cases, but, as often as not, The precedents conflicted as much as the claims.
Yeah, I mean, like a lot of the examples that Asha just read from that SSM that Nina grabbed are directly describing the situation here. He even says, do bastards? What order the bastards come? What about the will of the deceased? Yeah, it's like these are just like.
By the way, also that was even longer. I cut that down because he started going into the war, the 100 Years' War, and I thought I have to stop this somewhere.
Even George's anecdotes are a little extra. That's cool. Yeah, but it does describe it really well. Just describe not only the we broke down all the options within the story, but this just breaks down how it tends to work in any situation with these medieval or middle age or whatever succession issues. And it just a lot of times it just comes down to who's got more swords, which I don't think that will be what plays out here, though. They're not, like we said, they're not all just going to fight each other. So that's it's not going to be that as often as it is elsewhere. Okay, we've got a few questions from y'all. Some sent ahead, some sent during the episode. Let's get into that.
All right. First of all, this is a little bit of a digression, but we were talking about the idea of Sansa as skin changer. So I wanted to bring up a post that I had read a long time ago that I found, and I can link in the chat, from Nobody Suspects the Butterfly.
Oh, shout out to her, yeah.
Yeah, she always has fantastic stuff. Great resource on tumblr.com. So she basically talks about how Sansa bonds with the old blind dog. The first time that she does so with any animal, and she does so very quickly. It's the only animal that she's really had time with since Lady died. Yeah. And the old blind dog defends her. Like, that's how closely they have bonded.
Interesting, yeah.
But then they're separated. We get in Varamir's chapter, he thinks about how dogs are easy to skin change.
That's true. Maybe I think he says they're the easiest.
Yeah, he says they're like an old boot, like an easy boot to put on. Then, here's another little section where Sansa, when thinking about flying, she thinks, a falcon soared above the frozen waterfall, blue wings spread wide against the morning sky. Would that I had wings as well. Mm-hmm. And of course, we have the imagery from earlier that we've brought up a lot of times about her being a wolf with big leather wings like a bat. There's a lot of symbolism there that has to do with other things, but regardless, it's related.
Went hissed blood and all that.
Yeah, that's a whole other thing. But it's a quote to take note of. And then we have Bran thinking, I'd tell him I could fly, but he wouldn't believe, so I'd have to show him. I bet that he could learn to fly too. Him and Arya and Sansa, even baby Rickon and Jon Snow. We could all be ravens and live in Maester Luwin's rookery. And then we have the last thing I'll bring up here, which is from Hagen in Varamir's chapter. He says, I know skin changers who've tried hawks, owls, ravens. Even in their own skins, they sit moony, staring up at the bloody blue, which Bran actually does have a little bit of that. Like, he has more control, but he has gotten some of that mooniness, I think.
Yeah, and he's drawn to the ravens from the beginning.
Yeah, and so, like, we'd like to think that Starks would be a little more powerful and have more control, but it is maybe a caution that Sansa might get too into the escapism of it all, I suppose. Well anyway, there's my pitch for her having skin changer abilities. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt that she has those abilities. I just don't know that she'll bond with anyone.
Yeah, maybe it's just something, some minor thing. Like
yeah, but I think it's very possible that she will, like, skin change into a bird and see something really important, but not really. It never goes anywhere from there.
Another possibility is just that how it creates more of a bond between them, because we see Hagen and Borak, and they can sense each other. Like, the skin changers can sense each other's abilities, so that might be something that comes up, is that they sense it within each other. Like, Sansa gets around her family, and she's like, what is this weird aura I'm sensing from all of you? And they're like, hey, you have it too. Good question by AJ Borkar here. Says, would other northern houses bring up Sansa's letter telling Robb to surrender and that she was married to Tyrion? Yeah, that's a good, like, propaganda weapon to use against her. She was forced to write that letter by by
Yeah, I'm not sure about the letter because I'm not sure how many of them actually know that happened.
Okay.
But being married to Tyrion, I would say
they'll use that.
The association with the Lannisters. It's not something that Sansa obviously desired,
Yeah.
but it's something that was very publicly known, and it's something that Stannis was willing to use in his pitch to Jon to say, "What do you want Lady Lannister to rule Winterfell?" So it's something that could very much be used against Sansa in terms of saying, "Hey, you shouldn't be Lady of Winterfell. Remember, you were associated with the Lannisters," sort of thing.
Okay, yeah. Max L says, it seems like there's two simultaneous succession crises, one for the Targaryens, one between Fagon and Dany, and the other for the Starks in the North. Absolutely. There's a succession of ice and a succession of fire. It's super cool the way George is having these things come together, fighting over the throne in the North, which is super important to getting everyone together on the same page to stopping the real enemy. And then in the South, you got a similar situation where the real enemy is shaping up to be Euron, and they're better off facing down him and maybe Cersei rather than fighting them amongst each other. So yeah, it's really cool. George he's really good with these parallel. He loves to parallel, and he is really good at it. Anything to add to that, Nina?
No, I think you said everything I was going to say.
Cool, all right, yeah. It's kind of straightforward. It's a great thing to observe, but yeah.
Great minds, something.
Something. Thank you, Max L. Good comment. Then he also says, I feel like the fact that the Hound actually thought his brother was dead is going to be real important. Like when he hears Gregor isn't actually dead, that could bring him out. Okay, yeah, that's a fair point. Like maybe we don't need an epilogue, prologue situation to see it. We could just, comes out because of Gregor and not because the Quiet Isle was destroyed. Like you would have to get rid of the Quiet Isle being destroyed. Like I don't think the Quiet Isle gets destroyed off page with him at it, but if we just don't have that part, which is possible.
Yeah, I'm less convinced about the Gregor part because I think Sandor's more or less moved past that at this point. But I do think that there's a way in which Sandor can emerge without there needing to be a lot of fanfare.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, term. Again, you're right. Like this is like we shouldn't. We never forget George's creativity as a thing that is like, oh, we couldn't think of a way. Well, it doesn't mean he can't. Guinevere Greenstones asks, what do you think about the way Stannis has Theon hanging so close to him? Not just that keeping him close by is one thing, but also that he's making him suffer. Interesting. Yeah, I wonder about that. You and I talked about this offline. You made the point that, well, you can't have Theon elsewhere. You can't have a Rickard Karstark situation where someone just kills Theon.
There's too many people that want to kill Theon that Stannis is probably practical enough to realize the only way I can make sure that Theon is alive as long as I want him to is to keep him physically under my thumb, so to speak. So I think that makes sense. And also, Stannis doesn't have a lot of room in the Watchtower. So there's not a surplus of places to put Theon, but I think that's in his mind.
Yeah.
But no, Stannis is always a man who says, look, I'm not going to wipe out a bad act with a good or a good act with a bad. In his mind, Theon has committed a lot of crimes. Theon has committed crimes, not entirely the same crimes that Stannis thinks he has, but he certainly has committed crimes. And he's going to be punished for them. And Stannis isn't going to say, just because you brought me the girl I think is Arya, I'm going to let you go free. I'm going to take you in chains and I'm gonna put you until I decide what to do with you, so to speak. So that's very typical, very much on the road Stannis.
Yeah.
So I'm not surprised by that at all.
And she also wants to know if being in the North is influencing his decision making. I'd say absolutely, like he is definitely playing a bit to the Northern Lords' sensibilities, and this is an example of that. Yes, it's practical, as Nina says. There's not a lot of other places to keep him. Most importantly, you can't give someone else a chance to murder him in revenge. But also, given that he says, I'm not going to kill him yet, given that he says, I'm going to wait till Winterfell, I need to make use of him, he's got to give the Northerners something. He's like, well, see, I'm at least torturing him. It's like, because they want him dead now. So Stannis is going to delay that. At least he can be like, look, at least he's suffering. Like the guy is in pain. So at least you're getting something of what you want here. It's like a compromise of sorts. So that's kind of how I see it. But I think all this works together. Miss Man Jones says, do you think Stannis could marry Shireen to Rickon? I think it's a possibility. I feel the tragic events will prevent such an arrangement from ever happening. But on paper, there's some sense to be made of it. It could be,
sure. Yeah, I think the timing is the biggest issue here. I'm not sure when Stannis dies, and I'm not sure how Stannis dies, but Stannis is going to die. And I'm not sure when Shireen dies, but Shireen is going to die. So I'm not sure if either or both of those events occur before Rickon gets back to Winterfell, if Stannis even sees that Rickon is alive. I don't think the timing would necessarily work out to do that. And I don't think that Stannis, in his mind for the moment, Stannis may think, even if that were a possibility, Stannis may think that's kind of unnecessary at this point. If anything, the Starks should be grateful to me for what I've been doing. I shouldn't need to win them over with a marriage sort of thing. I need to save Shireen for, an enemy that I need to win over, as opposed to the Starks that I've basically gift wrapped their home back for them.
That's a good point, yeah.
So I don't know. I think there's timing issues. I think there may be political issues, and I think that ultimately it's a thing that probably won't happen. It could, but I have my doubts.
Like, Stannis originally wanted Jon to marry Val, but of course he didn't even know Rickon was out there, so that's completely because I would think maybe he would have tried to marry Shireen to Jon, but no, not under those circumstances. So yeah, I think I lean with you there. Like, it's a worthwhile idea, but probably not. Yeah. Curtis Frank says, do you think that we'll have more Jon chapters? We've never had an undead re-animated POV. If George wants to maintain mystique, then we can watch Jon from the outside. I have considered this possibility. I wouldn't say it's likely, but I gotta keep it in mind as an option. I think there's a chance, but probably not. I think we're gonna have
certainly an option. I don't feel that we won't have more Jon chapters. I feel pretty confident that we will. I think that George R. R. Martin wants to explore he's been pretty straightforward anytime someone has brought up the idea of Jon staying dead as being, that's not what's gonna happen.
Yeah, it's like, so you think so, do you? Yeah.
So yeah, he's been pretty explicit about that. So the idea that he's going to keep Jon out of the loop, I don't think so. I think Jon is too much of a central apocalyptic figure for him to fall back as a POV. I think we will return to him. How we return, I don't know. I don't know if we see him inside Ghost. I don't know if we see him as he's being resurrected, or if we only return to him when he's back fully human.
Yeah.
So
yeah, maybe
I don't
some
know,
time
but
passes and he's more adjusted, then like you can go back into his brain and feel like adjusted Jon rather than recently dead Jon. Yeah, I could see something like that.
I mean, we have precedent for a man who's died who's gone into his wolf and continued to be a POV. So
true that.
it's not out of the realm of possibility to continue to do that.
Lord Dom Snow says, do you think we will see where the others live? I used to think that. I'm less up on that possibility. It's interesting because I thought one of the things about Jon's death is that it enables him to go to places that humans can't go, potentially, like places that are too cold for a living being. And I've toyed with that idea, as like Jon could go to the land of always winter because he's undead, and the cold wouldn't get him. So it's possible, but that sounds difficult. I think we'll see it more like through Bran's visions or something, rather than face to face.
I think it'll be destroyed in an endgame scenario. The ultimate endgame is the destruction of the Heart of Winter, which I assume that's where the others are from.
Yeah.
I mean, all of this is very highly speculative. Are the others even?
They're from the stomach of Winter.
But supposing that the Heart of Winter is where the others are from, then I think the end game is that Jon, Daenerys, Tyrion destroy this and destroy themselves in the process of, we have to do this, like we have to destroy this to save the world sort of thing. Okay. Sort of self-sacrifice so that everyone else can be saved. That's how I feel about it. I felt that way for a little bit. I haven't given up on that yet, but we'll see where the story goes.
Yeah. It's Derek the Dane asks, is it possible that Theon via sacrifice could be the life that brings Jon back? Well, you can't say no for sure, but I don't think we need a life to bring Jon back. Beric didn't need death to come back. It was just the kiss of R'hllor. I mean, there was no explicit death after Sandor killed him. I mean, there was people dying all around him the other times he was killed because there was war, and ambushes and all this other stuff. But yeah, I remain unconvinced that it works quite like that. So
Yeah,
they're quite a while from each other too.
yeah,
Does the
distance is a
timing
problem.
and location? The timing and location just doesn't quite work out for me.
and I feel like the intentionality has to be there too. Something that I've always, thought about in terms of sacrifice and A Song of Ice and Fire is that I feel like you have to know that you're part of a sacrifice or you're making a sacrifice, or otherwise, like somebody somewhere dies and then you benefit
like
from
there's always
it. And they
someone
go,
dying somewhere.
So, and it also seems to operate, Reloric resurrection, to the extent that, limited extent that we've seen it, seems to operate, for lack of a better term, in energy and how much energy you need to expound to raise someone. So Beric was raised, he was very recently dead. And so all Thoros had to do was, do this sort of Reloric rite around him and bring him back, versus Catelyn, who had been 3 days dead in the river, and Beric had already died 6 times.
Yeah.
So the combination of those, I think, caused Beric's death. Like, that was the last of the energy that he had to do that.
Yeah.
So it may just be that if Melisandre has enough energy to do this, then she may not need a sacrifice. Doesn't mean that she couldn't, because God knows Melisandre's trigger happy when it comes to human sacrifice. But it doesn't mean I don't think that it's necessary either.
Yeah, there's a lot of ancient traditions, like real world and fantasy traditions, where like people believe that a lot of people dying at once causes stuff to happen. There's a lot of like cults that all killed themselves. They drink the Kool-Aid. Jim Jones, like, that was a perfect example of that, where they thought they were creating some mystical energy by doing it all at once or whatever. So and Robert in Deep Geek made that point for maybe what Euron is doing with all these priests and this blood and the sea and all that. Maybe there's some sort of creating a mass death thing. And now he's open to the possibility that it's just for show to make it look like he did magic, which is something you always got to consider with Euron and Melisandre. So that is very interesting. So we'll put that one on the shelf. I don't know. I would say no, but I'm not going to say slam dunk no, because we just don't know how this works. Tommy Pappas says, last week, Jason and Aziz theorized how and where Theon would die. Much of that speculation was centered around Theon as an archer. My mind immediately jumped to Moat Cailin. What are thoughts on that as an option, allowing survivors from the north fleeing White Walkers by heading south to narrowly escape? Yeah, if the war with the others gets so bad that they have to flee the north, Moat Cailin is interesting. Of course, Moat Cailin is defensible the other way. It might mean getting back into the north is difficult later, but of course, if there's no others there, I guess it won't matter. But I'm just curious if we'll ever see Moat Cailin again in general. I'm not sure that there's a strong reason for us to go back there. I want to.
Yeah,
but
I don't see the war with the others. I know different people have different ideas about where it's going to end, physically speaking. I do kind of center on Winterfell. I think that that's sort of the battleground and the end goal. So I don't think we'll go much farther south than Winterfell, which is not to say that anywhere farther south is not having its own problems. But in terms of this particular, so I don't really see a reason to go back to Moat Cailin. There's not much there at Moat Cailin to help out, so it's not a great last stand place.
Yeah, if they were coming from the south, that would work really well. That might be a good last stand place. But yeah, it's kind of in reverse, so. Yeah, I'm not sure that would work, but I really hope we go back there, but I can't think of a great reason that we would. Maybe something related to Hal and Reed, maybe? I don't know. Probably not. But we can hope. Michael Horfeld says, since Sapphire-Eyed Simeon Star-Eyes witnessed 2 Hellhounds fight at the Night Fort, my guess is Clegane Bowl is going to happen there. Now, well, I have a hard time imagining how the mountain would go all the way to the north like that. Sandor being up there doesn't seem so strange because we saw him go there in the show to help fight the others, and I could see him going to north to help fight the others. But the mountain going up there, I have a hard time seeing the mountain going up there.
Yeah, and I don't, again, like I said, I don't see a fight happening in their future. I think Sandor has thematically and personally moved past that. And I think Gregor has suffered his own hell and continuing to suffer that. I don't think it's fun being a necromanced corpse. So I think Gregor's got his own problems. I think Sandor's got his own problems.
Do you think Gregor doesn't have his headaches anymore?
I mean, the best way to get rid of headaches is to get rid of your head.
Yeah, exactly. So it might not be as bad as you're thinking, you know?
You know what? I didn't consider the possibility that this is helping his migraines. This is true.
Yeah, whatever works. We need a little sympathy for Gregor here. Come on, y'all. Like, feel bad for the guy, right? No.
Gregor has outsmarted us all. He's figured out how to fix his chronic migraines.
Clint Williams says, "I believe Melisandre's from Hardhome. Mark my words." Interesting. I wonder, but I wonder how that could be possible. She has memories of Asha, but it isn't explicit that she's from there. Just that she was there when she was young.
To get into that, what was going on in the chat is people were talking about how long ago people would have come to capture slaves at Hardhome.
Yeah, definitely there's slave taking there. So that
there has been slave taking, and so that is just where that comes from.
Okay, yeah, it's not certainly. I would probably
along
call that
with
tinfoil,
things
but not
like
crazy
Melanie
tinfoil.
being a known name in Westeros, although that's more of
Yeah.
a new thing we found out. You know, little things like that.
That would be really interesting if she's spanned the globe like that from Asha to Hardhome.
Yeah.
But she's old enough to
And
have
back.
done that.
Screw Lomas Longstrider. Melisandre's where
But
it's at.
you do think that she might, as much as any character can compartmentalize things, I do think that at the Wall, if Melisandre was from the North, that might somehow be in her memory. But it's easy for us to say it wouldn't be, but I do feel like we would have some hints.
Yeah, if she has two or three more chapters go by, which she may not even have, but if she does, and we still it still hasn't illuminated where she's from or more her backstory, then yeah, it'll be. But the less she doesn't think about the North, the less likely she's from it, I guess you could say.
Mm-hmm.
Or the more she doesn't think about it, yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if she were Westerosi. Again, the fact that he's dropping Melanie as a Westerosi name may or may not be significant. Wouldn't be surprised if she's not necessarily from Hardhome. I'm less certain about that, but who's to say?
Yeah, like it would be interesting. It would make a certain sort of sense if she's Westerosi, but not from like Westeros proper. But yeah, it's still kind of. There's definitely some more details we'd have to uncover to make this more possible. All right, let's see. Another question from Guinevere Greenstones. What do you think about how Tyrion's understanding of Shae has developed or / is developing? Well, that's a good question. He certainly has changed his thoughts on it. He certainly went from hating her to blaming himself for a lot of it, but still having kind of anger issues about it. So he's definitely changed on it, but I'd say is developing is what's happening. It's not. It hasn't.
I think.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I think he's kind of swung the pendulum in the opposite direction and probably farther than I think is fair.
Okay.
And he may never get to a fair point. And I mean, if you're raised by Tywin Lannister, you're never going to think you're being raised with a viewpoint that commoners are subhuman anyway. So if he can never get to a fair point, that's pretty good on Tyrion. So. But I think he went from a place of feeling that Shae had betrayed him, which was unfair because it was unfair to expect that Shae loved him. He paid her to be his girlfriend.
Yeah.
And that should have been all he expected. But now he's kind of swung the opposite way where, well, she was always a whore and always a liar, and I was stupid to believe her. And it's like, well, I mean, you've moved on from thinking that she loved you, so that's progress, but you also don't have the sympathy that I think you should have for her. Yes. I mean, Shae was 18. She was a teenage, low-born female sex worker. That's about as low as you get in Westerosi society. Nobody's looking out for Shae. So the fact that Shae is doing anything, Shae has to look out for herself. If someone corners Shae after Tyrion's arrested and says, talk or we're going to kill you, I don't know. I don't feel that bad for Shae talking.
Yeah, like what kind of how loyal is she supposed to be to this guy? Like, yeah, like not to,
for
to
a
the
guy
death.
that, by the way, had not been paying her for a while. He had stopped paying her and continued to expect her to work. And his plan in his mind was to marry her off to someone she barely knew who had no money.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm not really feeling that
she didn't. Yeah,
that he's gotten to a fair place.
Yeah, he's definitely in a better place than he was, but it's not a good place. Maybe if he keeps following this path, he'll figure some things out. But it's been an ongoing theme with Tyrion, is in part because of his parentage, in part because of his incredibly high place in society that he mischaracterizes because of his own shortcomings. No pun intended. But. No, really, no pun intended. That was an accident. But he he doesn't have sympathy or understanding for people who were born poor or born even middle class. Really, that's something he hasn't fully learned yet, and it's part of what association with Penny is showing him. He's sort of gleaning some of that through his proximity to her.
I mean, he said cripples, bastards, broken things. He did not say the poor.
That's true.
The legacy of Tywin Lannister, not the poor.
Yeah, Tywin hates the poor more than anything, right? Like, yeah. So that's that's a big thing for him to break free from, and being around Dany might help with that, because Dany does have that. Dany absolutely has sympathy and empathy for people who have less. Partly because she went through some of it herself. Like, she's been chased and enslaved and all that. It's part of why she has that perspective. Tyrion's gaining some of that too by he was a slave. He's had to work, major hours. Just his back was killing him. All this stuff, like giving him different perspective. So that brings us to the next question from Guilty Undertaker. Will Tyrion and Dany uniting make Tyrion better or Dany worse, or somewhere in between? I figure somewhere in between, because that's a good example. Like with the example I just gave, I feel like some of that's going to rub off on Tyrion. Dany's like, if you're not on that program, if you're part of Dany's court and you're not on the free the slaves, liberation track, Dany's going to notice that and be like, look, this is what we're after. This is part of who we are. If you're not part of that, then you're not part of this. So I think Tyrion has to at least be part of at least pay lip service to that, if not like fully become bought in. But I do think Tyrion, some of his like revenge and his darker tendencies will also influence Dany. I don't think they'll go as far as some people do, that she's just going to he's just going to fully use her as an instrument of revenge and destruction. I think some people, I think that pendulum has turned too far in the fandom on like the villainization of Tyrion. Like, people used to think he was one of the best characters, and now like the pendulum has turned, and looking at some of his actions, like, no, he's not such a great guy, but he's not an evil guy either. And I think some people have started to go too far with that, like, oh, Tyrion's a terrible guy, but no, he's gray. Like pretty much all the characters, he's done good, he's done bad, and who knows what's coming. What do you think about this? I gave a long answer there, but I'd love to hear yours.
No, I think that, and I think it's important to take into context. Tyrion encountering Daenerys, Tyrion has every reason to believe that Daenerys is not going to like him on sight. Why would she?
True.
He's the brother of the man who killed her father and the son of the man who murdered Rhaegar's wife, or had Rhaegar's wife and children murdered. So she has every reason not to like him. So Tyrion needs a way that Daenerys is going to like him and going to find him useful to keep around. What is the only thing that Tyrion can really offer Daenerys at this point? Well, I shouldn't say the only thing, but what's a key thing that Tyrion can offer? The fact that he probably has come to the realization that this Aegon is not, in fact, Aegon Targaryen, and is someone that's being propped up as Aegon Targaryen. And so I think Tyrion's going to say, look, whoever this is, he's trying to steal your birthright. You need to go after him. And by the way, I know who's on his side, and I know what they're planning to do. So you want to keep me around because I can tell you things about this guy.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to motivate Daenerys. Again, I don't think that makes her like dark or evil. Like, ooh, I'm going to kill the person who's usurping the throne that they have no right to anyway. But encouraging her, to pursue Fire and Blood energetically, which is something that she wasn't willing to do throughout most of A Dance with Dragons. Tyrion is now going to say, look, you should go after the people in Volantis. You should free those people. Look at all the people that you can get on your side if you tear down the old slave system in Volantis. He had those ideas in A Dance with Dragons. Now he's going to apply them to Daenerys. Again, do I think that makes Daenerys evil? No, not in the least bit. But something a little more violent, something a little more energetic, something a little more active than what we've seen of Daenerys before. And I think Tyrion will eventually encourage Daenerys to go after Aegon. And I think Daenerys will unintentionally blow up King's Landing as a result. I don't think Tyrion knows that he's going to blow it up, and I don't think Daenerys knows, but I think as a result of that will happen. So Does that answer make any sense? I'm
It
not
does,
sure.
yeah.
I don't know where I was going with that.
It does. And one thing just to add to that, something I hadn't considered that someone brought up elsewhere, I don't remember actually where I saw it, but Tyrion is somewhat aware of the wildfire caches that are in King's Landing. He's at least one of the people that discovered one of them, or helped discover one of them, and had it disposed of. So you wonder if if there's any culpability for him if he doesn't mention that, if there's any sort of like attack on King's Landing that he condones and doesn't mention that. Like, just something to keep in mind for later. There's not much we can do with that idea right now.
And the other question is, does he know they're still there? Because
Yeah.
he used a lot in
Right,
the
he might
Blackwater.
not,
So does
exactly.
he know
He doesn't
that there's
necessarily.
more?
Yeah, like we believe there's more because there's bound to be, because like, well, there's already been 2 caches found, and would they actually have gotten them all? It kind of makes sense that there still would be some.
I feel like Tyrion would be on the same page that we're on right here. Like, hey, if I didn't realize that this was happening this whole time, maybe there's more as well. Like, it just makes sense that this wasn't a one-off.
Yeah, definitely something to think about. So we don't know what Tyrion, what his conception of all this is, but it was a good point to raise. I wish I could remember who raised the point to give them credit, but perhaps later. Igor P from YouTube says, regarding Tyrion 1 and 2 from TWOW, as well as Dany 10 from Dance with Dragons, a burning horse is also the last thing Theon sees before losing consciousness at Winterfell in Clash of Kings. That's right. Yeah, we've seen the burning horse metaphor or symbolism a few times, twice in short succession there with Tyrion and Dany 10 there. Around Meereen and in the Dothraki Sea, but we also saw it, with Theon at the end of Winterfell. I wonder if there's some sort of symbol there that I'm missing, but it's just an evocative image of a horse on fire running. It's like, yikes. I don't really want to think about that a whole lot, but
Yeah, I think yikes pretty much sums up how I feel about it.
good observation by Igor there. Eric Forg says, do Asha, Tyrion, or Cersei lose their tongues? Does Cersei lose a foot to infection from the Walk of Atonement? Now, some of you might wonder, that's a kind of maybe seem like a random question, but I think where he's coming from is Jaime lost a body part, Tyrion's lost a body part, maybe Cersei will too, kind of rounds out what Tywin's prophecy about it, not real prophecy in quotes, of he didn't want his family to be mocked, and of course that's happening a lot. But she was already mocked, while she walked, which is, one of his ideas here about a foot infection. She did cut her foot. And of course,
she's losing her beauty.
Yeah, that's true.
Which is basically her losing a limb, a part of her.
True, yeah. She had her hair shaved, which is...
she's getting older, and all that, which she's not really old by any means. You will still be beautiful. This is not being ageist, but in her mind.
Yeah.
And in Westerosi society.
She feels that loss. Yeah. So, I am worried about Tyrion losing his tongue. I'm kind of down on the possibilities because of how important he is as a talker, but it certainly seems possible. I don't think Cersei will lose her tongue, although it's possible too if she ends up with Euron. He does that to people. So, and Lena Headey was certainly missing a bunch of lines in season 8. Like they, like where was her dialogue? She was almost like her tongue was cut out. So, how do you feel about it?
I think I've obviously agreed with you in all of our episodes that I am all too afraid of this Tyrion theory, the Quiet Lion theory, which it does make a lot of sense. One of the things I liked about it was just that Jaime has these interactions with Ilyn Payne, who cannot speak, which it's something to me.
Yeah,
it is notable to me for sure.
Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah, that's a very good point. What do you think, Nina?
I'm less convinced, only because I feel like if you're gonna have a major character, lose a major body part, well, it's not like they're losing, like, I don't know, the tip of one finger, where it's like, oh, that's really annoying, but it's not really like a thing that's gonna change my life necessarily. So if you're having a major character lose a major body part that is majorly going to impact how they interact with this world, there's a sense in which, like, if you do it too much, it kind of becomes a parody of itself, where
Yeah.
every character loses a body part. You get to lose a body part, and you get to lose a body part. It's like, it kind of loses the potency of, George R. Martin took a book and a half to explore how that affected Jaime. He's still exploring it.
That's
so,
true. Yeah.
Is this something that he really wants to devote time to, of let's explore how these characters now interact with the world, having lost a major body
That's
part?
a big authorial
I don't
challenge.
think so. There's a lot more that he has to explore with these characters that I'm not sure that he really has the time or energy that he wants to do. Not to mention, of course, that it's specifically the point of Cersei. Like, Cersei's already so doomed that it's like, oh no, I'm doomed to die and I lost a foot. This is just the worst day possible.
Well, she needs to definitely stay away from John Connington then, because that's something that could lead to a lot of chopped body parts
that's
off.
true. We weren't even thinking about the grayscale of it all.
That would really be like, okay, well, I thought we had too many body parts chopped off, but now.
But no, I do want to bring up. So Nina brings up a great point there, and something I think everyone should always be aware of, not to get lost in the weeds too much, and to really take that step back and look at things, from a meta perspective, from a thematic perspective, from a what does this really mean perspective, rather, it can just get really easy to lose sight of that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Laughing Stormborn again from YouTube says, I find it hard to believe the House of Black and White doesn't know about Arya's true power, meaning her skin-changing abilities. Their whole way of life is built on illusion and breaking illusions. I doubt an inexperienced little girl will be able to pull a fast one on them. She will believe she has fooled them, but it will be all the manipulations of the House of Black and White. Fair point. Very much a fair point. It's entirely possible they do know that she's a skin changer, and they're not letting her know that they know. And they're planning something. They have something in mind for that. They have a reason for that. They want this power for themselves to make use of it. It's entirely possible. Yeah, I think this is a fair point. Like, it is a little much maybe to think that Arya is going to outwit the House of Black and White. That is a tall order. Well, that's a fair point.
And the thing that I was going to bring up, and it's a great point that you just brought up, because it leads directly into what I was going to say here, which is that it's really hard. It's something that's really important is avoiding reader presentism, which is, because we as the reader know something, assuming that the characters in universe find it as obvious as we do. Right. Just because something has been revealed through one or more POVs does not mean that the characters who are interacting with one or more of those POVs know that information. Maybe, but not necessarily. So in the case of Arya herself isn't even entirely aware of her skin-changing ability. Yeah. Like, he knows that she skin-changed into the cat, obviously, but she's never called herself a skin changer. Right. She doesn't know what that is. She knows what it is in a story.
It's like a compartmentalized thing. We brought that up a few times.
No one's there to teach her, hey, Arya, you are a skin changer, and this is how that works. She's just experiencing it, kind of, doing it by action and not by lesson. So the idea that then the House of Black and White, who really only knows that she's Arya Stark, they don't even know anything else about her, would somehow assume, oh, obviously she's a skin changer. There's no other possible explanation. Yeah. I think that's going a little far. And again, you look at the scene, the kindly man, when Arya says, like, hey, I know you're the one that's been beating me, the kindly man doesn't, like, nod and be like, I knew you'd figure it out, like a winking thing. He seems genuinely shocked that she figured it out.
Yeah, that's
which
true.
Makes
that's
sense
true.
Because she's not using any of the, probably the assumption is that they'd use, like, I don't know, their other senses and hear his heartbeat or smell what he smelled like, or listen for, something else about him, or feel him and feel his skin or something. So
yeah,
she doesn't do any of that. So there is no real explanation. They're saying, how the heck did you do this? How did you manage to figure this out? And as a practical matter, seems like kind of a dumb challenge that the Faceless Men would give her if they already know that she's a skin changer. Like, you have to figure it out while blind. And we know that you can see through other animals, and we're not banning you from seeing through the animals, but this is a test.
Well, okay, we could parse that then. Let's say it this way. Maybe he's got a point that outwitting the House of Black and White is maybe a bit much, but that doesn't mean they know about her power, her skin changing. There's two different points here. Yeah.
the thing is, Arya has not outwitted the House of
Not
Black and
yet,
White. Like,
right? Yeah, like she's maybe going
fully
to.
owned up to, like, when they say, "Yes, look, I murdered someone," and I don't think he's going to get away with the murder of Ralph
No, she
either.
won't. Yeah.
So
We'll have to see. So it's a good point. A good point to raise, is to think maybe they're not as unaware of some things as it seems, but maybe they are also more aware. We'll have to see. It's a good point to bring up for sure. Thank you for that question, Laughing Stormborn again. Pretty good name too. Fodder for foreshadowing, not a question, but a great comment. A symbol for storks is mercy. And in the mercy chapter, we have Lady Stork. I did not know storks symbolize mercy, but I think I vaguely remember that from doing research from our Witcher podcast.
yes,
That's a nice
storks
catch.
have a lot of weird associations. There was this idea that storks were like would take care of their parent storks and would like care for them in old age.
What?
Which I don't know how that got started. But that was a very persistent idea for a very, very long
And
time.
here storks
so-
are just dropping their babies off at people's houses.
Well, that's bird law. They're
They
bound by
got
bird
other
law.
people's babies.
Yeah, other people's babies. Like,
They care for other storks. They don't care for humans. Screw humans.
I don't know if you can trust storks with other people's babies. It implies a certain level of trust, but hey. So yeah, good call, fodder for foreshadowing. Hey, we got a comment from our friend Jim, aka something like a lawyer, aka our frequent guest, most recently Barrison too, and he adds on to our discussion of psychedelic drugs in religious practices. He says, a lot of religions incorporate psychedelics into their practices. While the psychedelic vision quest is an idea that is seen in stoner comedy, there are plenty of shamanic cultures across the world who use psychedelics, from the people from the peyote of Native American and Native Mexican tribes to the fly agaric of Siberia to the ayahuasca used in the Amazonian basin. And then another comment added on to this from Wee Ginger Doug says, I studied and examined drug-induced religious experience as part of my final year dissertation at university, and it genuinely is a fascinating subject. Also, many new religious movements use it as part of deliberate conversion methods and techniques. So, yeah, as we said at the time, this is a time-honored tradition. Euron is just using the most extreme, brutal form of it. All of these examples were people taking it on, willingly. So although there is some deliberate conversion methods, some of it's maybe a little bit of trickery involved, but something Euron is a little more straightforward. That's some excellent additional
Putting Euron and
there.
straightforward in the same sentence.
It's like, why do you have an eye patch over your good eye, man? I mean, is it really just for the darkness thing? Probably not. He's just a weirdo. Last comment, question from Rod Dammit. He says, History of Westeros, could we hear your theory on how things will play out with Brienne and Jaime and Stoneheart? Probably my favorite cliffhanger. Sure. I'll go first, and then Nina, you can close us out here. I think it's going to come down to a trial by combat. I think Brienne will offer to defend Jaime. Jaime will demand trial by combat. They'll say okay, and Brienne will be his champion, and she'll win. I don't think Brienne dies in this scenario. So, but I don't know what happens after that. Does that mean she lets them go? Was that the deal? Like, if you win, you get to leave? I don't know. And I think maybe who their champion will be, my best guess is Lem, sort of like vaguely foreshadowed by Sandor. Being like, what about you, Lemon, or I'll fight you or whatever. I forget what he calls him. Some Sandor insult. So that's my short version. Of course, we could go farther than that, but let's get your take on it.
Yeah, and I'm a little afraid to say this, because anytime you bring up Brienne and Jaime, there's going to be someone waiting. So I'm sorry, anyone in advance. But I also agree there will be a trial by combat. But in the tradition of everything horrible going down with Lady Stoneheart's Brotherhood Without Banners, if Jaime insists on trial by combat, then they may say, all right, well, Brienne, you were Catelyn's sworn sword in life. So now you are going, I'm going to command you to be my sworn sword now. You fight Jaime.
Oh my.
And so that's a little bit of a tie-in, I guess, to kind of the Jon Corn half-hand fight in terms of a man with partial limb fighting someone else, and maybe also an intentional loss fight in which Brienne decides to sacrifice herself, so that Jaime can get away. And then I think Jaime does win. And then I think he goes to King's Landing and murders Cersei. But that's a separate point.
Yeah. Well, Crystal James from the chat has a very good counterpoint. She's maybe brings the possibility that would Lady Stoneheart agree to a trial by combat after how badly that went with Tyrion at the Eyrie? Good point.
I think she would, in the sense that if Jaime brings it up, then. And she's seen Brienne, if she thinks, oh, Brienne's defending Jaime now, then the kind of vengeful punishment is, okay, you fight Jaime.
Yeah.
So one of you has to die, sort of thing.
Yeah, that's still, she might, that's a good point, because it could still, she's not, she's not, in the Eyrie, she was invested in the result. This one, she wins either way. She gets revenge either way. So you're right. It's harder for her to imagine how this goes badly for her, how this backfires. Unlike, she saw what was coming at the bell. She's like, this Bronn guy, I don't know. He looks kind of dangerous. Are we really? This seems like we're risking losing here for no point. Why don't just keep him? Why give him trial by combat? Yeah. So, good point. Good answers. And that is our last question. We are done for the day. That was a really fun delving. You guys asked a lot of great questions. A lot of we had some saved up from past weeks, and there were a lot of good ones asked live. I had a lot of fun going over the Stark convergence. There's just so much to think about. Laying it out like the way you did is really helpful to a lot of people. I think everybody knows a lot of these basics, of course, but having it systematically run through with all the pros and cons of how they represent and who's backing them and all that, I think is probably very helpful to a lot of people to sorting it out in their mind. The Asha fragment, not a whole lot to go on with that, but we definitely sussed a few new things out. In the Riverlands prologue, that discussion, that was really good. I think that may have been the highlight today for me anyway, because that is just so many fun possibilities, and I'm just excited for all the different versions. Every version we came up with is awesome, and I know there's some versions that we couldn't have possibly came up with, and those are going to be awesome too, so it's all great. So thank you very much for coming on, Nina. This was fantastic. What do you have anything you're planning on writing about soon, or what's been of interest to you lately?
No, it's kind of a chaotic good situation where it's just anything and anything happens at any given time. No, I was, I don't know, everything and anything. So, no, it's all good. You throw something my way, and I'll probably think about it.
Right on. Yeah, you can ask her just about anything on her blog, and she, if it's a good question.
How many L's does it have?
1 L. Good Queen Alley with 1 L. Not 3. 5 is right out. 1 L. That's right. It's not Good Queen Ally.
Although I am an ally to Alysanne, but no.
That is true. And you are an ally to us. That's right. And a friend. So this all works out very well. So thanks everyone for coming. Thanks for everyone who stopped by live to hang out in the chat. Seems like there were some really good discussions going on. Some of that made it live for our discussion, which is great. We always love it when that happens. You guys give us excellent things to think about and discuss. And sometimes the questions are so good, we have to think about them after the fact too, and consider them offline, because it's just that thought-provoking sometimes. Next week, we have The Lost Valyrian Steel with Tommy Pappas, a.k.a. TKOK Podcast Network, a.k.a. New Dad. Then, the return of Sean of House Beard. And we begin Dunk and Egg for History of Westeros. That's going to be awesome. And it will take as long as it takes. We don't have a set schedule for Dunk and Egg. We're just going to go through Dunk and Egg until we're done. So I'm
one sentence every week.
Yeah, one sentence. I imagine it'll take 2 to 3 months, something like that. And of course, we'll continue to put out other episodes from time to time in between that. But that is the what we can tell you is definitely coming in the short term. We mentioned a few of our other episodes during this one. We mentioned some talk about the 5-year gap. We talked about the Battle of Ice. That's pretty much always coming up. And a few other various things like what else we talk about? We talk about the old gods. Yeah. We are again asking for your support for our audio project.
You were doing the Bernie Sanders meme.
I was doing the Bernie Sanders. I am once again asking you to support not our Patreon, our voice project, our Winds of Winter vocal pro. I'm also asking you to support our Patreon, but that's not what I was going to say.
A little reveal here, which is that we're working on Tyrion 2 right now, and the lovely Nina is Penny.
Yeah.
How nice, huh? It's still in the works, so it'll be a while before you guys all get to hear it. But exciting.
It is exciting. We've got a lot of good people for that one.
By the way, I will tell anybody, this will be my pitch to everybody to do it, because if the worst actor in the entire universe, can do it, then literally anyone can do it.
So we've got plenty more chapters left for that project. Get involved. A lot of you have, and we really appreciate that, but there are a lot of voices to cast. And, well, who knows what we'll do afterward. We've discussed, it's a long way out, but we've discussed maybe doing other chapters after the Winds of Winter one, just for the heck of it. Like picking a chapter from one of the many 350 plus chapters from the previous books and just doing that one. Why not? It's fun. So this could be a very long-term thing. So get involved. Why not now? And one of the best places to discuss it is on our Discord or Facebook group. Those, of course, are also venues for discussing lots of other things as well, both around A Song of Ice and Fire as well as other topics. So we will see you all next time. Thanks to our excellent guest, Nina. You'll be hearing her thoughts again in future episodes. And we'll certainly have her back on live as well again. Thanks to Asha.
A little bit of a talky sort.
That works for me, because I am too. Asha over there doing such great work. We got our mods over on Facebook keeping things in order, keeping the discussions tight and neat and intelligent and healthy. Same goes over on Flick and Slack and Discord. We got claridox.de with an amazing video intro. He even sent us a question today. Thank you, Michael, for your excellent work in the art realm and elsewhere in this community. Thanks to Kevin MacLeod for the Valar Rereadis music. Thanks to Joey Koval and Joey Townsend and Jesse Koval for the History of Westeros intro outro music. Thanks to Bengineer for the sound quality assistance, the editing, the back end engineering projects that go on. He's also a big part of the Winds of Winter audio project. Thank you to our patrons for keeping the lights on, for making this all financially feasible as our job, right? You guys are basically our boss. And check out our friends over at Here Be Dragons. We are ending right at the right time. They're starting in just a few minutes. They are talking Clone Wars Season 5 today, making their way through that excellent show. Shay and I are only on late Season 2, early Season 3 of that. We're making our way pretty slowly on that one. But I just read the most recent 2 Thrawn novels, so I'm definitely coming back around on some Star Wars.
And we
fun.
Also read Light of the Jedi, which
that
was the
even
first
better, yeah.
in the High Republic era of books.
Yeah.
So we have been engaging with Star Wars now.
We do like Star Wars.
I have also engaged in Star Wars. I have my Batu mug, so I can also
I cannot wait. I'm constantly jealous of you, Nina. Everybody, Nina gets to go to all the theme parks. She's been to Galaxy's Edge so many times.
Yeah.
You and I will go, Asha. We will go, and it will be amazing.
Yeah, Galaxy's Edge. That's cool. Okay, y'all. Thanks, everyone, for coming. We'll see you next week for more Valar Rereadis.